Hi, welcome back guys. This is your sensei, back with another fanfiction. This is the third part of What If Revived Naruto Got Harem. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Naruto woke the next morning with a pounding headache and the taste of sake lingering in his mouth. Every fiber of his being ached, his muscles throbbing in places he didn't even know he'd had. It felt as though he'd been put through a meat grinder, carved up and put back together at some point since his sleep. Groaning, he opened his eyes. To every man's wet dream, he had to blink multiple times to clear his vision, almost unable to believe what he was looking at. The taste of sake still lingered on his tongue, suggesting he'd done a fair bit of drinking last night after he'd crushed Minato's spirit. Duh, there it was again. The reminder of what Kushina and by default he himself had done to that poor boy. The look in his eyes had been completely soul-shattering one moment, then full of venom the next. He was almost certain he'd made an enemy of his father last night. But try as he might, he couldn't think of a way to undo it. Not without giving Kushina to him, and he wasn't willing to do that. Not now, nor ever. It was so strange the reborn Uchiha still wasn't all that certain when he'd gone from viewing her as his mother to a separate person, but it was impossible to make a distinction between the two now. Kushina was Kushina and that was that. Not his mother, just Kushina. But he digressed. Back to the coffin of flesh in which he found himself. In other words, he awoken to find himself surrounded by women. Kushina, Mikoto, Cara, Takura, Hoshi. At some point he must have gone home because here he was in bed and so were they. That was the problem. He must have been exhausted because he didn't recall anything other than turning the doorknob and walking in on Mikoto with a bottle of sake. Doubtlessly, there had been some drinking done to resolve his guilt. It really shouldn't have bothered him that much lies lapse in his memory, but somehow it did. The idea of missing even a few seconds was truly quite troublesome. Way back during the Fourth Shinobi War when he'd still been in Uzumaki, something like this often meant someone was trying to put him under a genjutsu or worse, the Moon's Eye plan was starting to affect him. He very much doubted that this was some trick of the mind, but just to be safe. Kai, he muttered, pulsing his chakra and trying to dispel the genjutsu. Just in case. Nothing happened. Kushina was still taking up firm residence on his right arm and Mikoto his left, whilst Cara and Takura had neither taken up residence lower on his body, his legs to be precise. Coupled with a certain Hyuga, the five of them barely fit on his bed, so much for trying to take things slow. What baffled him was thus why were they naked, more importantly why was he naked, and when the hell had Hoshi gotten here? He distinctly recalled parting with her back at Ikaraku, but here she was. Beady across as like fine silk, her cheek nuzzled against. She was surprisingly light, he realized. Soft, too. Stop that, do won't boy city stay. The reborn Uchiha chastised himself for that mental slip, realizing he was actually relishing in the feel of her bare ass against his own, the fact that he was still inside her. What? Oh dear sweet Kami, have mercy on my misbegotten soul and take me from this world. Naruto tried to slam a lid on that train of thought before it could run off the tracks, but it was too late. He realized exactly what had happened last night. What was still happening? He'd gotten drunk last night and tossed aside all inhibition. Had Hinata's mother, and probably everyone else in this room, if their naked bodies were to be believed. He could already feel a migraine coming on. He tried to move and swap himself with a clone. Mikoto stirred. One more move, and I'll genjutsu you into next week, she said sweetly, her words surprisingly coherent despite the fact that her eyes remained firmly closed. If she hadn't been speaking in her sleep, he was almost certain she would have done it, too. He'd been compartmentalizing her as of late. It was really only natural that she'd want some more time with him. Still, those words sent a quick tingle of dread shooting up his spine at the thought of what this woman would to him if he disobeyed. He was certain he could escape, but she'd probably tear strips out of his hide before he did. Not a risk he was willing to take under normal circumstances, but given the severity of this one, take his chances. Yes, dear. 3 seconds passed. Then, poof, Naruto. That was how the meet and greet started. Just like that. Naruto's impromptu escape caused Mikoto to stir almost immediately. The moment she realized he wasn't in bed, shit hit the fan. Needless to say, she decided to enact her promise to genjutsu him into next week. That woke Hoshi up. Her cry of surprise in turn roused Kushina, the latter shouting, leaving Takura and Cara wondering what on earth all the ruckus was about, and so they rose as well. By the time Mikoto finally caught him, Nagato and the others were awake as well, though thankfully everyone was wearing something by then. In Naruto's case it was mostly bruises. A powerful shinobi he might be, but even the mightiest of men were powerless before the righteous fury of the female race. Mikoto had been unable to place him under an illusion thanks to his superior eyes, but she'd certainly carved her retribution out on his hide. It would have been funny if he could heal, as it were. He had to forcibly suppress what little of Kurama's chakra remained. He didn't know. Thankfully they were all clothed before Nagato and the others woke. Naruto ushered them off to the kitchen with a clone and gathered everyone else in the bedroom. He'd been dreading this moment, trying to put it off for the longest time, but it seemed that fate had other plans. This even had been a long time in coming, and now it was finally here. The talk. So you're all alright with sharing him? Hoshi asked, disbelieving despite her best efforts. She was a very forgiving and loving person by nature, but even this stretched the limits of her credulity. He had 3 clan heirs in the room, including herself and 2 delegates from Suna. Their situation shouldn't been volatile, tenuous at best. And yet it wasn't. The girls seemed to get along just fine with one another, readily welcoming Kushina as well as herself into the fold. There was no argument or squabbling, they simply deferred to Naruto's judgment in this odd matter. So very strange. Well, I was his first, Naruto proclaimed proudly, visibly preening under the stares that followed. Naruto face-bombed. Here it comes. First, what poor Cara looked like she'd just been scalded. What did we do last night? Like I said, I was first. First to get a very nasty genjutsu if she keeps talking. All eyes shifted back to Naruto. The male Uchiha's eyes were flaring an eerie violet. I've already had all I can stand of bickering from last time. Just the sight of those rimmed orbs was enough to stall the argument that, only moments ago, had threatened to billow out of control. Just like that. One wouldn't think it was possible, but he'd done it again. Kushina quietly shook her head in amazement. There was just something about Naruto that drew you to him, made you want to fight for him, perhaps even die for him. Face to face with his steely resolve for the first time, she found she could understand just how easily he inspired people. So apparently some sake was involved last night. Lots of sake. He continued tersely, now black eyes passing over each of them. I'm probably to blame for that. If you want me to apologize, now's the time. Makoto looked away guiltily, Kushina coloring, recalling his earlier words of wanting to take her out before anything truly intimate occurred between them. Near as mine and Hoshi's eyes can tell, we all got wasted last night, and she's the only one who lost her ID because of it. I want you all to understand that I never planned this. He paused in silence, allowing those words to sink in. However, it doesn't change the fact that, and I'll say this as many times as I need to, that I care for each of you in equal measure. There is no favorite here. There never will be. Understand? Hey, you excuse me, are you fighting? Everyone turned toward a very confused Conan, having wandered into the den. Her bright amber eyes regarded them with just a touch of confusion, bafflement prevalent in those shining orbs. There was a long moment of silence, and then the inexplicable occurred. She's so cute, Hoshi squealed. Naruto facepalmed so hard he nearly broke his own wrist. Conan blinked, baffled to find herself in the Hyuga's arms. Hi. All right, discussion over. He sighed with an air of finality. Time for breakfast. And to Hoshi's great delight, she learned that Naruto was an able cook and an Uchiha cook. His clan didn't know what they were missing. One hearty meal later. Taijutsu. Naruto nodded, barely able to keep the solemn smile from his face as he finished stretching. Admittedly, been looking forward to this since the moment he'd woken up. Well, he hadn't known he'd be waking up to this situation, but nevertheless it was an opportunity he wasn't going to let slide. He'd become too reliant on the fancy tricks that so defined his new clan. If he were ever denied them, he'd be in a pinch. No, it was time to go back to basics, see just what his new skills were when they extended beyond mere ninjutsu and genjutsu. Time to see what this body of his could really do. He'd assembled them all in the backyard just outside his apartment, one of the few redeeming features about his new quarters. It was a bright, sunny afternoon behind them. If one were inclined to listen, you could just barely hear the sounds of his clones setting to work on the apartment. Renovations were long since overdue. If he was going to be raising 3 orphans and look after his girls, he'd need to radically renovate his entire living arrangement if he hoped to accommodate them at all. Thankfully, he knew a thing or two when it came to building. But none of that was on his mind now. My physical skills have been getting a bit rusty the past few days, he continued, rolling his shoulders, wincing in appreciation as he felt the joints pop into place. Need to keep them sharp. Besides, his gaze turned to Conan and the rest. This will be a good chance for the kiddies to see what a shinobi can do. Kushina balked. He'd taken on an army almost single-handedly, and he called that rusty. She wasn't sure she wanted to see him in top form. It certainly didn't help that Naruto had donned his ancestors' old armor for this particular occasion. He wouldn't say where he had gotten the dull red plate armor, but it contrasted sharply with the black garments he wore beneath. In that instant he looked almost exactly like his ancestor, minus the hair. But you didn't need long hair to strike fear into the heart of an enemy. Kushina knew that for a fact. After all, she'd only kept hers long because Naruto had mentioned admiring the crimson tresses, and she loved the way he ran his fingers through it. And bad Kushina saved those thoughts for later. I'll say it again, Naruto continued, shouldering his war fan. I won't use ninjutsu or genjutsu, only taijutsu. You're free to use whatever techniques you want. Finally, a rare smile graced his lips. Even then you won't be able to touch me. Impossibly, his smile grew, becoming almost childlike in its intensity. Whoever does gets a pre-eyes. A bold claim, Makoto replied, sharing and flaring at the challenge. You're not even going to use your line. Nope. Hoshi seemed to agree with that statement. You won't last a second. We'll see, Naruto replied in a sing-song voice. Cara gulped slightly. Of everyone present, she was the only one who hadn't seen what Naruto could do in the realm of physical combat. Even Hoshi had gotten a glimpse of his skills. She felt like the odd duck out in this strange little flock he was forming. Naruto noticed this, biting back a rueful sigh as he watched her fidget. Time and time again he tried to help her work on her confidence, but it was terribly slow going. The Scorpion still refused to accept her because of it, and he daren't have her try to sign any of the other contracts. It would mean the world to her if she was accepted by her family's summons. If she wasn't, well, he'd have to do something about that now, wouldn't he? All right, go. As one, the Kunoichi blurred forward. and as one, they were unable to harm him. For all their skill, they simply didn't know how to work as a team. It was a weakness, one Naruto instantly capitalized on. Ebon Hair danced wildly in the air as his body spun forward at them, issuing smooth kick and flowing swings with nothing more than practiced grace. Fighting enemies coming from every side, the reborn Uchiha shot his arms out, impeccable poise and precision behind every strike. For a seemingly simple kata, it was amazingly complex, flowing from punch to kick and vice versa with maximum force and no energy wasted. It was, in a word, incredible. It was also chillingly familiar. Mikoto didn't know what to make of it, but her eyes did not lie. His fighting style wasn't purely Uchiha as it should be, yet she recognized it, somehow. She could see elements of the Hyuga Juryuken style as he warded off Hoshi, traces of Uzumaki as he bobbed and weaved amidst Kushina's chains and fists. Even a smattering of the Suna Taijutsu as he held back both Pakura and Cara. That wasn't the Uchiha style. What was it? This wasn't anything she'd seen before. She'd glimpsed it during their first spar, but now, whatever it was unsettling. Like a stone firm upon the shore, he took wave after wave of punishment, weathering their strikes where he could, deflecting when he could not. And then he stopped defending. Mikoto nearly cringed in disbelief as one of her hands did the unthinkable, striking him hard in the face, and passing right through the afterimage. Oh, it was her last thought before she saw stars. Naruto was seemingly in 3 different places at once, blurring over Kushina's head to strike at her neck, driving an elbow into Hoshi's solar plexus, headbutting Mikoto when she tried to close the gap before sweeping her clear off her feet. He was a human whirlwind moving like wind, never pausing once in his assault. Even as Pakura turned to face him, the shinobi whispered away in a swirl of movement, flowing over and around her scorching jutsu. While not as lethal as it ought to be, it would still sting to be struck by one of the searing spheres. But they never hit. The Ryuban Uchiha suddenly lashed out with an arm, the side of his hand knifing into the Kunoichi's neck, right beneath her left ear. Takura's eyes immediately rolled up into the back of her head as her knees gave out, her body crumpling limply to the ground. Naruto took a step towards her Cara, who stood there, mouth agape, a small curve of bemusement leaping to his lips as he approached her. Kushina and the others were down and out. The poor girl was frozen with fear and goggle-eyed, unable to take so much as a single step forward in the face of what she'd just witnessed. "I give up," she squeaked. What he asked in disbelief. "Is that it?" With a blink of surprise, Kushina forced herself to sit up and look around, her bright eyes searching for the unexpected victor. Her mouth curved down into a frown as she saw the dark-haired shinobi still standing off to the side, his pale face focused firmly on Cara. Then she smirked. An opening. Launching herself forward, she had the satisfaction of her fingers brushing his back, of hearing him laugh. Then she only a blur. Suddenly she was face down in the dirt, her stomach screaming from a seemingly unseen blow to the solar plexus. There had been no transition of motion. Naruto simply moved and she went down. Whatever he did, it was effective. And that, he said to Nagato and the orphans, is taijutsu. Any questions? If their awestruck faces were anything to go by, he'd succeeded in proving his point. Now, why don't you go inside with Cara and get changed? I can't very well train you in your pajamas. Quietly they allowed the Kunoichi to usher them back inside where fresh clothes awaited, having been washed only the night before. He'd leave a clone behind to train them and the rest of his students. For now his attention was fixated firmly on the 4 maidens laying prone at his feet. A gentle chakram juice nudge to Pakura's neck helped the crippled Kunoichi to stir, though not without a good deal of swearing on her part. Well now, try as he might, Naruto couldn't keep the smile from his face. What have we learned today? Wait, we were supposed to learn something. Kushina winced. What, did you think I enjoyed beating the tar out of you? Mikoto groaned, struggling to stand on legs she still didn't quite feel and failing miserably. Never underestimate your opponent. Close, but no cigar. Always watch your blind spots. Hoshi was the next to take a stab at it, cradling her stomach tenderly. A valid point, but wrong. Naruto shook his head. An over-reliance on lines. Also important, yet incorrect. Teamwork. Kushina realized it as soon as the words escaped her mouth. Teamwork. Naruto nodded, affirming her point. If you'd all worked together from the very start, the 5 of you would have stood a fair chance of overwhelming me. As it stands, you were sloppy. His eyes flashed in a rare emotion, disappointment permeating those charcoal orbs. Only one of you touched me, and even then just barely. Which brings me to my next point. And the winner is Kushina. He sounded quite pleased with himself, she realized. If you count poking me in the back as a hit. Kushina groaned and flopped onto her back again, visibly heaving for air. That washo did you do that? You weren't this good last time. She could already feel the bruises forming upon her body. By this time tomorrow she was going to be incredibly sore, if not sooner. When he offered her his hand she wearily accepted it, cringing as she was hoisted to her feet. On some level, she supposed she ought to be proud that she'd been able to hit him at all, but the level of speed with which he'd moved told her it had been luck, not skill, that allowed her to touch him at all. That thought was wiped away when she found herself in his arms. God, why did he have to be so tall? She knew he'd been adamant about things such as public affection, but in this moment she simply didn't care. There were only the strong joints of his limbs wrapped around her waist, cradling her. What the hell was going on here? Naruto usually wasn't so open with his feelings, not that she was complaining about this sudden lap. But for each instant that he held her, she could feel herself growing more and more agitated. She knew that the others were watching, knew she shouldn't be doing this in front of them. Of course I wasn't, he murmured, lowering his face to hers in reply. I wasn't holding back this time. You should count yourself lucky you don't have any broken bones. She flushed, well aware of her heart hammering in her ears. You said there was a prize. I did. His lips quirked, ever so slightly. What is it? This. Fire filled her belly, spooling uncomfortably between her legs as his lips claimed hers. It was a surprisingly chaste all things considered, but one that left Kushina's whole world reeling nonetheless. When he began to pull away, she grabbed him, roughly dragging his mouth back down to hers once more. He didn't resist. You're a real jerk sometimes, T-Tebane, she murmured, pulling away. Naruto laughed. Love you, too. You're looking awfully chipper today. Tsunade's voice was suddenly there, piercing both his mind and the mid-morning haze. She finally reached the training grounds. Wake up on the right side of the bed. Naruto was feeling chipper after remembering that morning. But her words also reminded him of the place and time, of why he had left the girls behind with yet another of his clones and come here, to the grounds. He had a very important promise to keep train a medical corps in 3 days as per his bold boast. It was no mean feat, but he remained confident in his ability to pull it off. After all, he had an ace up his sleeve, one even old man Sarutobi had failed to account for. Bullshit, Yami snorted. You just thought it up this morning. Yeah, but they don't need to know that. I think it's quite inspired, given the circumstances. Using your eyes to imprint information a lesser scale of what I once did. You again, you again. Laughter, rich and amused, resounded in Naruto's mind. It sent a subtle shiver shooting down his spine. Thought I went away? Did you not, Madara? Definitely not, Madara. Madara didn't sound like that. It felt like fingers of ice were digging into his brain, making it hard to think. What was this? He tried to pin it down, but the presence was wet, oily. It slipped through his grasp even as his fingers closed around it. Cold and clammy, it DD itself around him, threatening to stifle all thought. With all his might he resisted, pushing away to the deepest, darkest corner of his mind. Who in the hell are you? I suppose you could say I'm an unwanted guest. It purred softly, the words dripping into his mind like sweet, frozen honey. Someone who was dragged back with you, a party who has a vested interest in your little scheme for peace. Whether it fails or not is simply up to you. And then it was gone. She, whatever it was, it had sounded like a woman, but something in that voice made him quiver. Whatever this thing was, it was worse than Madara. Wiser, and infinitely more powerful. Earth to Naruto. The Uchiha started. Violently, Tsunade was peering at him, her face dimpled in a slight frown. Spacing out, she asked. Something like that. Crap. It took every fiber of his being to school his face into an expressionless mask, and not flush in remembrance both of that and of the future Hokage had said to him the last time Tsunade had him alone. Then there was this strange voice in his head, mocking him. This sinking feeling in his stomach was beginning to grow all over again, and he wasn't sure how to deal with it at all. All right, I'm sure you're wondering why I dragged you here. Precisely. How, exactly, do you plan to train an entire medical corps in 3 days? When he'd told her of his proposal to the old man, she'd nearly cracked him across the head without thinking. But he clearly had a plan of some sort, so she was refraining from further violence now. Still, Tsunade remained doubtful. He'd assembled a small corps of shinobi before him as a demonstration, 10 in total. A series of jounin and chunin who, according to him, weren't afraid of a little pain. All of them were Uchiha. But why did he have a row of clones facing them? Do you remember what I showed you in Suna? He asked, ing his head. With my eyes. Tsunade shuddered. How could I forget? I was sick for nearly 2 whole days after you gave me that message. Well, I'm hoping that these will be more resilient. In essence, I'm going to mentally imprint all my knowledge and skills related to medical ninjutsu. With luck, they'll be able to mimic them. At her reluctant expression, he quickly clarified. Don't worry, Makoto and I handpicked them yesterday right after I spoke to the old-timer. Surprise, surprise, some people in my clan aren't complete assholes. These 10 are more than willing to try their hand at medical career if he simply lacked the skills. So this'll work, then Tsunade reiterated, frowning. She had to admit, the prospect was intriguing. But the sheer incredulity of it boggled the mind, threatening to cull her enthusiasm before it could even take flight. If he could pull this off, if Naruto could do this, it would make him even more of legend than he already was. Not only would he be responsible for saving lives instead of taking them, but he would be effectively culling the constant casualties they suffered without a medical ninja in each squad. If it doesn't send them into a coma. Naruto shrugged. But hey, nothing ventured, nothing gained, right? That's completely reckless. Naruto's only response was to activate his Mangekyou Sharingan. As one, his clones mirrored the motion. Instinctively, Tsunade drew back, not wanting anything to do with those dreaded eyes. Tsukiyomi. Tsunade frowned, then cringed as every shinobi went ramrod straight, their eyes turned glazed, pupils dilating. She knew full well what it was like to have your mind violated, but this was different. Naruto was cruelly carving information into their minds, no doubt years of experience, into the brains of his fellow clansmen. It seemed to last only a moment, merest sliver in time. Then 2, then 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. By the time 13 seconds had passed, they were sweating. She didn't like it. Naruto. He didn't answer. When she turned to face him, she saw why. His face was set in a rictus of concentration, eyes branching with strain. For each second that had passed, his expression became more and more intense, as though he were physically fighting to imprint the knowledge into their minds. By the time a full minute inched by, he was trembling. "Naruto," Tsunade nudged him. Once more he didn't respond. Another shake equated little more than a mumble. "Not yet, Naruto." Still nothing. A snake of dread coiled in her gut. Naruto. With an aggrieved gasp, the powerful Uchiha jerked back to reality, crimson orbs fading back to black. As when his candidates also slumped with him. They were pale and haggard, Tsunade noted idly, but otherwise looking no worse for the wear. Naruto didn't give them time to recover. With a flick of the wrist, he indicated one of them and beckoned the youth forward. A Chunin, if the vest was anything to go by. His thin, reed-like features were almost entirely eclipsed by his dark hair, a long curtain that looked as though it belonged more on a young woman than a man. "Name?" Naruto asked. "She, sir." Tsunade nearly choked at the soft, tenuous voice that emerged from the boy's mouth. "She was a girl." "She." A nod. "Do you remember what you just saw?" There was a pause. "I believe so, Naruto-sama." "Can you replicate it?" "One way to find out," Naruto answered. In a flash, he summoned a kunai to his palm and wielded, the cold edge biting deep into his wrist. Tsunade gasped at the suddenness of the motion, a gasp as welled up from the grievous slice in his limb. Naruto didn't so much as bat an eyelash. Instead, he looked at the Chunin expectantly. "Well," he asked, "what are you waiting for?" He waved the wide hand in front of the lass's face, awaiting treatment. "I'm going to bleed to death if you don't do something." Tsunade escuguaked. "Are you insane?" "Not at all," Naruto replied at Tsunade. "She, if you will." Gulping, the lass laid her hands over his wrist. Her brow furrowed in concentration. Almost immediately green chakra stemmed from her fingertips, flowing up through her palm and over the wound. Within minutes, the gaping cut had been reduced to little more than a paper cut. A second later, and all that remained was pink skin. Naruto laughed, crowing in triumph. 9 more attempts were met with equal results, with the weakest a mere second slower than the others in his case. It was, Tsunade realized with bated breath, a unilateral success. Well, he grinned. A couple more of those, and, without thinking, her body reacted. She grabbed him. "You bastard, you actually did it." Naruto grunted as her arms closed around him in a brutal bear hug, ribs threatening to crack under the pressure. Tsunade arms can't breathe, can't. His words died off into a strangled gurgle as her lips claimed his. Tsunade was ing him. His mind imploded. That chase touching of the mouths wiped away all sentient thought. She'd ate him without thinking. He realized it. 2 beats later, and so did she. With a strangled yelp, the blonde jerked backwards as if she'd been burned. "I damn it," she sputtered, a hand flying to her lips. "That wasn't, I didn't mean to." Whatever else she might have said died as a shadow detached from the nearby forest and forcibly made itself known. As they looked on it slowly assumed shape and form, the darkness inexorably dripping away to expose a trim figure clad in a dark cloak, their face hidden behind the ceramic mask of a rat. "Uchiha Naruto," the Wisama Stanbu inquired. "Yes, your request has been approved," came the muffled reply. "Danzo-sama will see you now." Naruto risked a glance back at Tsunade. "It can wait." Now, there was no questioning the tone. Or not at all. Naruto felt his mouth curve into a small smile. Very well. Finally, Minato was grappling with himself. Half of him was filled with hate, brimming with violent anger for the man who had wronged him. The other wallowed in self-loathing and piteous sighing, wondering where it had all gone so wrong. Ever since the Uchiha had arrived, nothing had been the same. It had all seemed so minor at first, but by the time he realized Kushina was drifting out of his grasp, it was already too late. Everything was going horribly wrong and he couldn't see a way to stop it. Not without ending the one responsible for it all. But that would mean betraying the village. And no matter how much he might loathe the upstart Uchiha, he couldn't do the deed. The idea of betraying his village, trying to take a kunai to all that he'd known and loved, was as much foreign to him as the idea of not breathing. So he resolved to ignore him. He would not think of the man who had stolen Kushina from him, would not try to kill him, would not turn a knife against him. Yet, so focused was he on ignoring said Uchiha that he wasn't watching where he was going. He rounded the corner, perfectly content to spend the rest of his day brooding. He'd train and perfect his new technique until the jutsu was without flaw. Nothing else would distract him. And when he had perfected it, he would prove once and for all who was superior. Then Kushina would see, then she would know unbiddens. He realized his jaw had clenched while he locked, muscles locking painfully. Yes, he would show him. He would show them all. Fate had other plans. Something Somyeon collided with him as he rounded the bend. He went down in a tangle of arms and legs. A very feminine squeal greeted his ears. Shaking the stars from his eyes, he willed himself to look at the one who had felled him. It was a girl. "Who're Nozomi," she stuttered out, her cheeks coloring prettily under his gaze. "My name's Nozomi." Minato's jaw dropped. Pale eyes stared back at him from a round, oval face, framed by dark brown tresses. A Hyuga angry as he was, he almost dismissed her completely out of hand, but something made him pause. Something, he knew not what, caused him to take a closer look. She was a slim little thing in that lavender-colored kimono, filling it out rather well despite the fact. Right, he chided himself. Definitely a Hyuga. He'd always known them to have long hair, but hers was ludicrously so, trailing past his shapely waist. She was, well. His brain took a moment to restart, rebooting itself as he looked on. Kushina, who was Kushina? Maybe life didn't have to be so bad after all. Naruto's eyes slid lazily to the ambu accompanying him in the room. 2 for the door through which he'd already entered, 3 for the wall, and 5 more gathered around him in a loose semicircle, of which there were more than strictly necessary. They smelled wrong. Root kind of wrong. These weren't the guards Hiruzen had assigned him for his personal guard. He knew each and every one of them by their scent, and these were not them. That, and there were too many. He could see it in the way they held themselves, that in the fact that they were armed with more than just their standard katana and the odd shuriken. Kurama might have left him for good, but the kitsune's latent ability to sense negative emotions still remained. And these ambu stank of it. They weren't here to guard him until he met with Danzo. They were here to kill, end him before he ever met with the old Warhawk. Of course, it all made sense now, albeit in a twisted sort of way. Danzo wanted him dead. Gone. And why wouldn't he after that business in Rain? He'd long since been affiliated with Hanzo, long enough to make a militant move like this once it became clear he was at risk of being exposed. Naruto strongly suspected the man wasn't the one pulling the strings from the shadows, simply wanting to end him before his treachery against Sarutobi could be revealed. Naruto nearly facepalmed at the thought, and he would have too had he not been in such rigid control of himself. I honestly did not see this coming, but hey, at least it gives me a chance to test something out. Slowly, he began to exude chakra, hardening muscles and tensing ligaments for the conquest that was to come. They thought they could kill him in this body. They had a better chance of defeating the Shodaime Hokage in his prime. Sighing, he rose from the couch. Before we get started, he began, the words low and deep in his throat, I have just one question. Naruto allowed the smallest of smiles to grace his visage as he spoke the last words, a touch of killer intent suffusing his voice as though he were talking about something vaguely unpleasant, not contemplating the mass murder of Konoha's most elite force. A terse silence accompanied those deceptively calming words, almost a dozen masked faces turning towards him in eerie unison. Does anyone want to get out? It's nothing personal, one of them murmured, drawing a katana. Naruto laughed. Is that so? Feels kinda personal. Scarce had he spoken than the world dissolved into a blur of motion. Then he gloried in the majestic art. That was his taijutsu. The first ambu saw little more than an orange blur before the Uchiha's Warfen smashed into his face, shattering his mask and the face beneath like so much glass. He swirled onto the second before being arrested from behind by a third, but scarce had he been restrained than he flowed forward, bodily tossing the hawk-masked ambu over his shoulders and into another of his compatriots. Then there was no time left to discern any of their individual motions, his body a glorious streak of black and red as he effortlessly carved through the remaining root standing between him and the door. His hand slapped out and caught the flat of a blade, levering himself upward just as a katana whirled underneath, impossibly maneuvering up and over his attacker in a twirling roundhouse kick. The sweet sound of odd bones snapping was music to his ears as he riposted and danced amongst them, offering no sound save for the occasional grunt of exertion or scornful scoff when his opponents proved too slow to comprehend his moves at even the slowest of his speeds. He was destruction born anew, made death incarnate as he slipped between the elite soldiers sent to kill him. Bones snapped like twigs, muscles were torn in twine, nothing and no one was spared. And just like that, it was over. The last of them, a fox-masked man, offered only a wet gurgle as he slid off his own blade and slumped to the floor. His last sight was that of those overwhelming onyx orbs. Then as he looked on, they snapped into pure scarlet, a trio of tamo swirling within them, then growing larger still as he activated the Manjikayo. No, that wasn't possible. The Uchiha had laid waste to them without using the infamous orbs of his line. But that wasn't possible. Wasn't using Sharingan. Danzo, he spoke, putting the man in his thrall with a blink of those hypnotic eyes. Where is he? Aye, where is he? Why, I'm right here, youngster. Naruto was already turning, whirling even as his ears detected the sound of the trapdoor slitting open. It was nowhere near his feet but an all. The wall slid up to expose a slim, frail-looking man, his body leaning heavy on a cane for support. His lone, unbandaged eye squinted sourly at the Uchiha standing in the wide remains of his men. His lips turned down in a slight frown as he shuffled forward, limping with some effort. But his adversary wasn't fooled. This old veteran could give him one hell of a fight, if he was so inclined. The question was, would it come to that? He knew for a fact that Danzo didn't have the stolen Sharingan yet, nor did he have any counter in place that wouldn't involve some sort of hand sign. He would have to be quick. It seems we have much to discuss, he rumbled. Naruto knew there would be no talking. The old man wanted him dead. Had, since he'd set foot in the village. There was only one way this would end. They circled one another for a terrifying moment, young and old, inspired and corrupt. Abruptly, the former reacted, eyes widening harshly, tama widening. Before Danzo could raise so much as a finger, the Manjikayo Sharingan held him in his crushing grip. The cane clattered out of his grasp, rattling harshly to the floor in a cold clatter of sound. Naruto permitted himself a small smirk, eyes line orb still spinning slowly as he held the older man in his thrall. Checkmate, satisfaction flooded him like a river, swamping his stress in a sea of relief. Oh yes, there was much to discuss. Indeed we do. Naruto knew something was wrong the moment they locked eyes. It was too easy. He just didn't realize it then. They circled one another for a terrifying moment, young and old, inspired and corrupt. Abruptly, the former reacted, eyes widening harshly, tama widening. Before Danzo could raise so much as a finger, the Manjikayo Sharingan held him in his crushing grip. The cane clattered out of his grasp, rattling harshly to the floor in a cold clatter of sound. Naruto permitted himself a small smirk, eyes line orb still spinning slowly as he held the older man in his thrall. Checkmate, satisfaction flooded him like a river, swamping his stress in a sea of relief. Oh yes, there was much to discuss. Indeed we do. His mind was ticking, trying to figure out what was wrong even as he spoke. Now, he began slowly, start talking. Danzo had made his first and last mistake, never look into the eyes of an Uchiha. That bothered Naruto. He knew the wily old warhawk was smarter than that. Even in his crippled state, he should know better. That he had made such a rookie mistake meant one of two things. Either he'd underestimated the old man, or this was a trap. Rinnegan and Sharingan both told him the man standing before him was no mere cage bunchin to fool the eye. His chakra was read to him like an open book. So what? Then he saw the paper bombs lining the walls. Only a few days ago, the explosion might have actually been enough to harm him, or at that very least, cast him in a suspicious light. Not now. Now he hunkered down and spread his chakra outward in an aggressive push-a-pull. Following seconds later, ripping them from the walls and ceiling, aimed the smoldering notes together. Susanoo extended outward from him, a massive blue hand clamping down on the blast mere moments before it would have consumed the entire room, its ribs circling outward to shield him. BGMI. The subsequent detonation shattered the chakra, bone hand into 1,000 tiny pieces, sending both Naruto and his captive staggering backward a few steps. The former hissed, staring down at the severed stump of a limb, his left arm shredded into pulpy mass just above the elbow. Shit! Panic threatened to seize him. Then he felt the pain of new bones growing, saw a skeletal limb emerging from the charred stump that should have crippled him for the rest of his life. Within moments muscle flowed out over it, followed by fresh, pink skin. And with the regeneration, he felt the last of Kurama's chakra reserves shrink to almost non-existence. Inwardly he heaved a heavy sigh of relief, despite the loss of his apparent invincibility. That many tags might have proven problematic, spread out as they were. But, beyond the acrid sense of smoke and charred bone, there was no proof to be found. Out of the corner of his eyes he saw Danzo, freed from the fierce genjutsu that bound him and making for the door, darting in and out of sight like a wraith in the smoke. When he saw that his trap had failed to eliminate the threat, the fight seemed to drain right off of the old warhawk. Where are you? The Uchiha turned his eyes back on the council member, Sharingan gleaming balefully in the smoke. He carefully reached down to retrieve the severed limb and destroyed it with a quick burst of flame. Then he gave a low snarl, sounding to Danzo's ears, very much like an starving animal. Death, he said simply. Danzo drew back as he started forward, drawing chakra to his lungs. Naruto, no, little pig, don't you dare scurry away. A quick step placed him firmly between the council member and salvation. He was probably regretting soundproofing this room now. Naruto towered over him in the smoke, his murderous expression becoming painful to gaze upon as the last of the smoke cleared. When he smiled, Danzo was once more reminded of a wolf. Let's hear you squeal, he said. Little pig. Before Danzo could reply, clenched knuckles barreled into bandages covering the left side of his face. Naruto struck out at him yet again, driving him down to the ground as he groaned in agony. It was a good place to hit. The wrappings would conceal the bruises, and what couldn't be concealed could always be healed. Yami growled in agreement. Sneaky little devil. I'd say he deserves to be punished for that little transgression. There it was again, the mysterious voice. Thankfully, he was too angry to think about it. Not when Danzo had tried to kill him for a second time. Just like he'd killed Sai all those years ago. Just the thought of it made him growl in pure fury. Here was a man who was S of the earth, who tried to make his life a living hell in the future. He'd allied with Hanzo and ruined Nagato's life. Pushed to have the Uchiha exterminated, rather than continue the talks of peace. But this went deeper than that. The man had called him here, lured him in with the intent to kill him. If he had been a little slower on the draw, he'd be the one lying there in a pool of. He'd be fooling himself if he said he didn't feel a trickle of satisfaction that came with breaking him. The fist came down on his head once more with a crunch once, twice, 3 times. Each blow jarred his hand, sent pain shooting up his arm. But a lot less pain shot up Danzo's. One hand reached down, forcing his lone eye to meet the sinister glare of the Mangekyo. Now, where were we? Meanwhile, in the southern training grounds, warning lemon incoming. Yes. Nozomi gasped out a litany of other words that would have put the Hyuga elders to shame had they heard them, hips swaying and grinding against his as she said loudly. You'd never guess that she was the Namikaze thought to himself. Once the pain passed, she seemed to take an almost visceral delight in the act, riding him on and into oblivion. Hot, steamy, Hyuga in the training grounds hadn't been on Minato's agenda this evening. If anything, intimacy was the furthest thing from his mind. He wanted to train. Get stronger. Nozomi had offered to help in the only way she knew how, by tending to his overtaxed muscles with a gentle application of Juukan and medical chakra. Exhaustion was something he could ignore, but he couldn't practice when his body gave out. He appreciated her efforts, he told himself, but even he knew an obvious crush when he saw one. He'd no interest in a relationship or women. They hurt too much. Indeed, Minato had learned that lesson the hard way, and resolved to keep the eager Hyuga at arm's length for the duration of what seemed to him, at least it'll be a short-lived friendship. But as many things often do in this world, it simply happened. An innocent touch led to one thing and then another, and then he learned that the Hyuga wasn't all that shy when they were alone and their clothes came falling off. They were, after all, teenagers, and they had their desires. For Nozomi, it was the gratification that the object of her affection for all these years was returning her feelings in ways she hadn't even dared to imagine. His hands wandering over her body, mouth molding against hers with a hard hunger that seemed to wipe all the world away. For her, it was bliss. For Minato, it was more the act of release than anything else to be purging himself of the dark, brooding emotions that had consumed his mind for the past few days. Here, now, he felt like himself. Uchiha Naruto was far from his mind, the slight he'd committed against him pushed to the back bracket of his brain. There was only the here and now. With a war on, the potential to die shot skyward, causing the denizens to adopt a rather philosophical approach to the chaos raging just outside. Take what you could, while you could. He wasn't sure what had caused his sudden lapse of judgment, but he wasn't regretting it now. His mind ceased its wandering as she quickened her pace atop him, placing her hands on it so she could make more of an up and down motion, those purdas bouncing with each motion, skin slicked with a fine sheen of sweat under the starlights. Her S began growing louder as she bounced above him. He could feel her legs begin to quiver as she moved, the muscles in her body reacting to, then tightening with, the pleasure of her oncoming orgasm as he thrust up into her with reckless abandon. And then, without warning, she came. Minato-kun. The future Hokage gasped quietly as released within her, comedy Nozomi's cry of climax to memory. Seemed she was a screamer, after all. One final thrust of his own and then his knees finally betrayed him, his bare back falling hard against the grass. Nozomi came tumbling after, slipping out of him as she collapsed into his. His arms curled around her, instinctively holding tight to his Hyuga beauty. Nozomi whispered quietly to him, but he barely heard the words. Only a few moments after release, and his mind was already elsewhere. Kushina. 3 days had passed since he'd first laid eyes on Nozomi Hyuga. Run into her. Literally. What he'd thought to be a chance meeting quickly became something more, something that skipped past the shallows of mere platonic friendship and dove straight into the deep end. He was hesitant to quantify just what that something might be, because, try as he might, his mind still lingered on Kushina. He tried hard to push her from his mind in the last 7 to 2 hours, he really did, but it never seemed to work. Nozomi was distracting, yes, but the moment she was gone, thoughts of the redhead returned. Minato was baffled with himself. Nozomi was everything anyone would want, kind, sincere, and a hellion between the sheets. Any man should be happy to have her. And Minato was happy. Really, he was. But his mind wondered what it might be like to have Kushina on top of him. Beneath him, crying out his name wasn't over her. His feelings, his hunger for her still burned like a brand in the back of his mind. It wasn't gone. Just ignored. Always present. He wouldn't be rid of it. Perhaps he never would be. Somehow, that frightened him. Hours later. So, I heard Danzo confess to corruption this morning, then he offed himself. Naruto turned his head a fraction of an inch at the sound of her voice, looking up from the report in which he pretended to be engrossed. He scooted aside as Tsunade approached, making room for her on the wall beside him. She took her place to his left wordlessly and folded both arms across her. They both knew what truly happened. Naruto had mined the man's mind for all the manner of information he could, then quietly issued a command to his brain telling him to write down all of his less than sanctimonious acts on paper. Then he ordered his heart to shut down. Even to the trained eye, and with no other injuries glaringly apparent, it looked as though he'd simply willed his heart to stop beating. War was such a stressful thing, after all. Who knew where one's loyalties might lay? Explaining the bodies would have proved more difficult had he tried to cover their deaths up. In the end, he'd elected to tell the truth. They'd attacked first, on Danzo's orders. The rest had been as simple as showing the interrogating Yamanaka the memories of Shimura's own attack on his person, as well as the attempt to blow him sky high. Thank Kami for the powers of a selective memory. They couldn't pull all the real information out of him even if they wanted to. And besides, the bodies in the lobby added weight to his story. The death of Danzo, as they were calling it, had circulated for a few hours before his reputation was in tatters. Men spat at the mention of him and his once proud legacies. Women wouldn't dare speak his name. In the end, the demise of Danzo and his U was chalked up as another casualty of war. Naruto earth to Naruto. Yes, unfortunate thing, that. He sighed at last, uncrossing his arms languidly. It is so tragic when we lose our elders to the ravages of treachery. But at least there won't be anyone to stand in the way of the medical corps now. Kinda convenient, don't you think? Perhaps. What? That's it. Sarcasm is one more service I offer. He quipped. Compassion costs extra. Ass. She elbowed him. Naruto battled back the urge to smile at Tsunade's retort, his gaze drifting back to the door once more. They'd both been summoned to the council chamber so that Naruto might present his new medical corps for the council to inspect. Comprised of mostly Uchiha, although that hadn't been his design. That all mentoring them with the Mangekyo had proved to be an invaluable tool. His new clansmen were more resistant to the painful prowess inflicted by Tsukiyomi than most. Even so, he'd tried to recruit the more humble of the Lord. Anyone not of a strong mind would wind up in a hospital bed, no doubt about that. News of Danzo's death was only just now beginning to trickle into the public ear. No one was shedding any tears over his death, save perhaps Koharu and Amira. Sarutobi might be a little saddened as well, given that Danzo had once been a teammate. Hopefully that grief wouldn't sway his decision. Hopefully, he hoped to God he'd be able to convince them that the medical corps was a viable option for the war. It would either make or break his plans in the future. I hope this works. If it didn't, a lot of things could go wrong. Hundreds could die in the war. Worse, after all the changes he'd wrought, not having a medical corps might cause some bizarre ripple in the timeline. Or it might not. Time travel confused the hell out of him. So did women. He wasn't trying to build himself a harem, not by any means, but fate seemed to have other plans. He risked a glance askance at Tsunade, daring to stare at her out of the corner of his eye. Only a few months ago, the blonde would have broken his arm for coming within 3 feet of her. Now her shoulder was brushing up against his, and she made no attempt to pull away. She'd been like a grandmother to him when he was young, but without the distinction of time between them. And after several missions, it was difficult not to see her as a woman. A very attractive woman. Down boy backhanding his mind did nothing to smack the thought back into the pit it had crawled out of. He had enough women on his hands, but that niggling idea still persisted. Regarding Tsunade with a keen eye now, he willed himself to look at her through a practical lens. Framed by the evening torchlight, the shadows seemed to ebb and flow across her face, writhing like a thing alive. That expression of intense concentration on her face only heightened the illusion. What did he think of her? She was a teammate, an ally, someone who'd confided in him, trusted him to have her back. Well and truly a far cry from the bitter woman with the fear of he'd once convinced to return to Konoha. Tsunade was unfettered by the burdens of guilt and loss. And Waki and Dan weren't dead, wasn't even sure if she'd met the latter yet, and Orochimaru hadn't betrayed her. Jiraiya wasn't depressed. All around them the hidden leaf flourished in spite of the war raging beyond its borders. Its citizens protected from the danger of Iwa and Kumo. And now, Shinigami willing, he was about to help her make her greatest dream a reality. His feelings were decidedly murky, all things considered. I don't know. The blonde began to fret, pacing. What if this doesn't work? What if the old man won't change his mind? Don't doubt, he muttered softly, following her every step. Doubt kills. His black eyes shot back to the door with that statement, suddenly intensely grateful he'd discarded the armor after practice with Kushina and the others. Wearing Madara's old armor made him feel too much like the man himself, and he didn't want that. He'd take this old Jonin uniform over that red plate any day. It'll work. The words were chanted softly to himself now, almost a mantra, as if they could somehow dispel the shadow of his own doubts. It'll work. He'll listen. And if he doesn't? Naruto felt his eyes flare at the thought. Tsunade must have seen it too, because she swatted him on the arm. Oh, no. Don't you even think about it. Hey, I wasn't. Her glare said otherwise. Whatever you say. Well, I do say. Naruto blinked, momentarily taken aback by his own words. Kami, he'd actually considered it. Putting Sarutobi under Jinjutsu. Just like Uchiha Madara had done to another cage. He shivered. What the hell was happening to him lately? What was he becoming? Only a year ago such a thought would have shocked and all but appalled him, doing the same thing that had been done to Igura, the Mizukage. He seemed to become more and more like that man as the day by day went on. The thought was troubling. And yet, there it was, lingering in the back of his brain. Already he saw less and less of himself, his real self, every day when he looked in the mirror. Sometimes, he couldn't see Uzumaki Naruto at all. Cracks were starting to appear in the facade he'd worked so hard to erect around others. What would happen when it finally broke? The Shinigami had warned him against telling the truth of his existence, saying that it was fruitless, but living such a secretive life was beginning to wear him down. Sometimes he lay awake at night and wondered, did Kushina and the others care about him because he was an Uchiha, or did it stem from the kindness that he'd shown them? He didn't know anymore, and that frightened him. Just who are you, anyway? Tsunade's sudden question caught him flat-footed in mid-thought, but he was quick to recover. His head at a side, like a dog listening to a new sound. Why, a Naruto. Who else would I be? No, I mean, who are you, really? The former Jinchuriki nearly face-palmed, but not in relief. Not this shit again, Tsunade. Don't you Tsunade me, I'm serious, she pressed, her curiosity remaining unsated. You roll on up in here like a tornado a couple months ago, rescue that kid Kushina, and all of a sudden the old man, then the whole village starts tripping over its own 2 feet to stay in your good graces. Don't believe me? Listen. Holding up a hand, she began to count off upon her fingers. You waltz in and the Uchiha start worshipping you, then you crisp one of your own clan members and they don't bat so much as an eyelash. How am I doing so far? Well, you didn't mention what happened after. Tsunade's shriek of indignation was his only warning, then her face turned scarlet and he narrowly missed having his head clobbered clear off her shoulders. We're not mentioning Mikoto, Baka, she yelped. Whatever you say. He raised a soothing hand. In the absence of his words, she dared to press on. You help forge a pivotal alliance with Suna, acquire not 1, but 2 concubines, secure a summoning contract that Kumo's been searching for the last century, end up a Jonin in record time with 3 runs under your belt, endear yourself to the heiress of the Hyuga clan, kick the ass of Hanzo the salamander, adopt 3 orphans, who would have had no place to go if I hadn't done anything, I might add. The look she shot him could have sent Uchiha Madara running for the hills, screaming for his mother. Okay, I'll let you finish. Good, she huffed. Then there's the odd matter that you're the best damn healer I've ever seen. You're like a brother to Jiraiya. Orochimaru actually talks to you, and don't even get me started on the eyes. Then, her cheeks burned a hot pink, and her mouth seemed to snap shut of its own volition, preventing her from adding the effect he did on her. Seeing an opportunity, the Uchiha cleared his throat to speak. If it's the Mangekyo you're worried about, I have it under control. Ha, technically true, not a lie. Thought I'm not going to ask how you knew about it to begin with. Tsunade glowered, folding both arms before her ample bosom. Sure thing, Mr. Rinnegan. Naruto had the good sense to blanch at those words. How long did I suspect you had those eyes? The healer snorted. Not long at all. Jiraiya got a good glance. But now I know. She thrust a finger into his, her voice dropping to an almost furtive whisper. And now in conclusion, this whole Danzo debauch. I miss anything? Or did you go and start another war when I wasn't looking? Now I know you're not a spy. You've already done far too much in too long an amount of time for us to be any decent sort of espionage. So I'll ask one more time. Just who are you? There was a moment of silence. Naruto considered telling a lie. Considered it again. Eventually, he decided to risk it. Hell, it might even feel good to tell the truth, for once. Steeling himself, he spoke quickly, saying the words before he could regret them. I'm a mutated ninja from the future. Tsunade kept a straight face for all of 7 complete seconds. Then she started laughing. So it was true, then. The Shinigami had been right. Even admitting the truth did nothing without proof, and there was none he could show her, nothing by which he might convince the Konoha. For better or worse, no one would believe him. A wave of bitter, cold resentment burned in the back of his throat. He was well and truly dead. Naruto Uzumaki didn't exist to these people. Uchiha Naruto did. It was still a humbling thought. Wow, you really almost had me there. Fine. You don't want to talk about it. I get it. Then that smile vanished, replaced by that same grim, stern expression once more. But you can't blame me for being curious. Any sane person would be. You've done so much for everyone, yet no one really knows you. Yeah, hardy har har. Seriously, can you please spare me the 20 questions? His eyes shot back to the door, wondering why it still remained shut. I have a mission to lead tomorrow, and you're starting to stress me out a little. Another one. Those hazel eyes narrowed in confusion. It's only been 3 days since we got back from AIM. The old man must really be set on you if he's throwing you back into the thick of things. When he looked away, she moved closer. Are you sure you're ready to lead? As his silence persisted, so did she. Where are you headed, anyway? Kiri, he said at last. Tsunade hissed. You're leading that mission, the one to recruit the clans. The very same. What can I say? He shrugged. I'm a hot commodity. Then he caught her inquiry at the tail end. And of course I know how to lead. I took charge back in Suna, remember? That was against a squad. You'll be sheltering civilians this time, non-combatants, not to mention commanding your own allies. Naruto felt his brow draw down in a frown. He knew the risks that came with the territory. Painfully so. During the closing days of the war he'd been tasked with escorting refugees away from Madara and Abido's wrath, and even with shadow clones, it was no small task trying to fight an offensive and defensive battle at the same time. Few, if any, managed to escape from the wrath of the Uchiha. But this was different. He wouldn't be fighting against 2 godlike beings, but average shinobi. Something well within his league of expertise. At the worst he'd have to deal with Yagura himself. He'd be on guard. He could have told Tsunade all this, but he elected to remain aloof. All he said was thus. I know what I'm doing. I certainly hope so, she murmured, peering back out into the murk. She must have noticed the apprehensive look on his face too, because those hazel eyes focused on him anew with diamond-esque scrutiny. What are you so anxious about? If not that Naruto squirmed as the Konoha continued to peer at him. Finally, he caved. I've got a hot date after this. Her expression could have melted crystal. Hey, now, Jay, just because we had doesn't mean. Cool your jets. It's not you, he replied coolly. This time, Tsunade flushed, but quickly regained her bluster. You're impossible. You know that running around with a harem like that, some might even call you indecent. She seemed surprisingly calm, given the knowledge of his recent exploits. Really, I don't know what I see in you. Insufferable bastard, you. She sniffed, turning away. And there it was. Awkward as hell, but they'd cleared a hurdle. She'd made an admission, cleared the air between them. He didn't know whether to call her mature or not. Naruto sighed, pinching his nose. Hey, it's not like a plan for it. He fumbled for the words. This just happened in a tie. Naruto found himself yelping as the blonde took hold of his right ear and yanked. Hard. After a moment's struggle, she released him. Good thing you're cute. Bah, I'm sure you say that to all the boys. She eyed him crossly. Only the ones who get on my nerves. Like Jiraiya, he snickered. Tsunade jerked as though she'd been struck. What? No, he's like a brother to me. Why would I even know? I see what you're doing. I'm not doing anything. He feigned indignation. You're trying to distract me, she hummed, eyeing him. So I won't ask another question. Am not. Who's the unlucky lady? Then she asked. Okay, that hurts. His hand clutched at his. You say that like I'm cursed, or something. It's Kushina, isn't it? Urk. Naruto clamped his mouth shut with a resounding pop. Just be careful, she warned, her voice dropping. It's not forbidden, but student-teacher relationships have a tendency to blow up in your face. I'll take that into consideration. He'd already considered it 1,000 times, 1,000 different ways. It hadn't changed his answer. He'd promised her a date, and by the log, he was going to keep his word. That drunken night notwithstanding, he'd promised he was going to do things properly. It just didn't feel right screwing her. Many reasons to ignore that without getting to know her first. He was determined to do this thing right. He'd seen the mission roster and knew who'd be under his command, just as he knew he'd have most of the mission to Kiri to reconnect with Makoto, assuming no last-minute changes were made. Time much needed in his opinion. Hakura and Cara would stay behind to watch over Nagato and the others. Hoshi was off on another mission to the border, which left him with his favorite Uchiha on what could quite possibly be more than a month-long mission to a foreign nation. If he didn't fulfill his promise to Kushina, he was fairly certain she'd clobber him into next week. Just one thing. He blinked, redirecting his attention to Tsunade. After this mission of yours, I think we should have a drink. Naruto nearly broke out laughing. Tsunade was legendary in his time for her love of sake. Look, Tsunade, I don't think I could keep up. I wasn't asking. She waved his words off as the door suddenly swung open, admitting them at last. He couldn't help but to smile at that. Challenge accepted. Success. Naruto wanted to jump for joy as they departed the chamber. An hour later, the only thing stopping him from doing so was the knowledge that it would break his cover. Sarutobi had, surprisingly, seen the wisdom of his plan. When presented with 7 squads of capable healers, he would have been a fool to refuse. The medical program would be instated immediately. Each medic would be integrated into a team and learn to work within that unit before setting out into the field. It might cut back on missions for a week, but it was done. For the first time, he felt like he'd made a real impact, one that would save lives instead of take them. Don't think I've ever seen you this happy. Yami quipped darkly. How can I not be? I off Danzo and did a good deed. He very nearly skipped at the thought as he swaggered down the street towards his destination. People will live because of what I've done here today. Gah, your idealism is making me nauseous. I thought you lost that in the war. Not all of it, Naruto sing-songed back, narrowly fending off the urge to whistle whilst he walked. It felt nice to discuss the day's events with someone after all he'd been through. Even if that someone was just a voice in his head. He'd take what he could get at this point. Murdering in cold. Unimpressed. You again. And then there was this mysterious voice that seemed to crop up with increasing frequency as of late. She actually sounded pleased. It worried Naruto a bit that he'd stopped referring to the entity as an it rather than labeling its dulcet tones with an actual gender. But what truly bothered him was thus she seemed to be actively endorsing his actions as of late, rather than condemning him. Faceless, though she might be, there was a distinct smile there in her words. What can I say, came the haughty reply. I'm a woman of refined taste. Slaughter and deception often went hand in hand in my era. It's so pleasing to see that they're still at work in this one. So you are, in fact, a woman, then Yami sniped. Not some wrinkled old prune, right? Hey, just clarifying, the last thing we need is another guy in here. Total sausage festo. Despite his trepidation at conversing with a relatively unknown entity, Naruto smiled as she clobbered Yami into silence. What exactly are you? A ghost in the system, if you will. I'm no tailed beast, if that's what you're thinking. I'll be watching you a while longer. To amuse me. And then, just like that, she was gone again. Pushing that thought from his mind, he kept walking. Naruto's path led him on a winding, circuitous route through the no-empty marketplaces. Hakura and Cara might dwell with him, but Mikoto and the others had homes of their own. So too did Kushina. He was only just beginning to accept the ready idea that the feisty redhead was no longer his mother in this timeline, but asking her to move and straight out of the gate not that ready yet. He stumbled suddenly, realizing that he'd reached his destination. He was staring at the door. A few steps and he'd cleared the porch. Clearing his throat, he reached out and knocked once. The door swung open almost before his knuckles even left the wood. Hey, Naruto stepped back into the night to avoid getting smacked in the face and saw Kushina waiting for him, her small body framed against a lone light shining from the stairs, arms folded across her. He knew in an instant that he wasn't on time. Why, you ask? Because she wasn't smiling. You're late, Titebane. Sorry, he apologized, raising his gaze. The Shinobi Council kept me Woa. His jaw came unhinged. She'd chosen a scarlet dress that matched the color of her hair, a slim little number with a nice plunge at the one that outlined her beautiful body in all the right ways, yet not enough to be seen as a scandalous piece, or something worn by those awfully reputable behaviors. She was better than that. Ending just above the knees, its straps flared out at her shoulders, causing the fabric to hug her just so in a way that hinted at what lay beneath it and the shawl she wore, sheltering the smooth white skin of her shoulders. And were those heels? His jaw dropped even lower. And you're wearing a dress. So she shrugged, the motion doing wonderful things to her dress. Do I need an excuse to look this good? You do know we're just going out for ramen, right? He gestured to his own fatigues, a simple pair of black slacks and the long-sleeved blue shirt he often wore when in uniform, sans the flak jacket. It hadn't occurred to him that he might want to change outfits. He was regretting that decision now. When faced with that scintillating dress, he found himself wishing he'd bought a tux or something. Anything was better than looking as fool in front of her. Again. So, Naruto barked out a laugh, bemused by her bullish behavior. I suppose not. There was another moment of tension between them. Naruto sighed at his student. All right, I get that you're angry. What do you want from me? Those bright eyes sparkled mischievously. Kushina was enjoying this. She liked watching him squirm. She shut the door at her back and stepped forward, standing on her tiptoes with the heels she had just enough height for her mouth to brush his without him leaning down. Naruto shuddered. He smelled something on her, a subtle scent blown on the wind. Perfume. He had plenty of time to contemplate it because she twirled away and took hold of his arm, dragging him down the steps and into the street. Arm in arm they walk as silent as the grave, broken only by the quiet click of her heels. Naruto stole a glance out of the corner of his eye. She was smiling. Suo, how much ramen are you buying me? Naruto fought a smile, knowing at once that the ice between them had been broken. As much as you want. Her grin grew. Best guy ever. Prep. Then she stumbled. Her once confident gait turned wobbly, almost pinwheeling for balance. Naruto arched an eyebrow as she clutched at him as the poised facade she'd worked so hard to erect crumbled around her in an instant. She swore like a sailor and kicked the heels off, sending the red shoes clattering down the street like twin missiles of crimson death. Kushina raised a fist and spat at the. I hated those things. I never should have let Mikitoni talk me into wearing them. He couldn't help hold himself back any longer after that. He burst out laughing a loud, mirthful cackle that seemed to draw even more ire out of the tiny redhead. As he looked on her face slowly turned the color of her hair, and the crimson curtain seemed to writhe behind her like a thing alive. She looked all of 3 seconds away from flaying him alive. Poor thing, she was really giving this dating business her all. The rambunctious tomboy that he'd taken under his wing was doing her damnedest to impress him, and it showed. Kushina, it's not funny, Databane. She stopped her tirade and looked at him, tears glimmering in her eyes. I tried so hard to look the part, and you laughed. It's not fun. Naruto's mouth smashed against Kushina's in midspeak, claiming her lips in a way that he'd never dared to do before. The redhead's shock, such as it was, didn't last very long. Her wide eyes slid shut. Forced its way from between her lips, muffled by his mouth over hers. Her arms went around his neck, pulling him close, forcing their bodies together. S pushed up against his masculine arms went around her waist and helped keep their bodies as close as physically possible while still in their clothes. The amount of time they spent there, in the middle of that darkened street, lost in each other's arms and the warmth of the other's mouth was utterly indeterminate. Naruto couldn't begin to figure how much time must have passed. Nor did it really matter. All that he cared about was the woman in his arms, the feel of her lips, soft and supple and warm, and her amazing body as it pressed into his. They only stopped when oxygen became a problem. Kushina pulled back, gasping, her face flushed, shoulders and heaving as she tried to regain her breath. The Uzumaki woman's body glistened with trace amounts of sweat caused by the heat building inside of her. Naruto watched as one adventurous little droplet traveled down the notorious gap between her cleavage. He would have felt jealous, but knew that he would be experiencing something much more pleasant with her eventually. I like you better without the shoes, he said. But I'm short, she protested feebly. He bent down and at her again. There's nothing wrong with being short. Think of it as fun-sized. Deciding to just go with it, Naruto reached out and slid his hand into hers. Kushina almost tripped at the sudden feel of skin contact, but he managed to keep her upright. He fought down another laugh. She tried so hard to be someone that she wasn't. Now her true, likable self was shining through. He loved her even more. And Naruto, on her round, enlarged eyes stared at him in disbelief. You don't mind, do you? Asked Naruto, holding their conjoined hands up for inspection. He laced his fingers through hers, his light tan contrasting with her fair-colored skin. And not at all, Kushina squeaked, her face coloring further still. Naruto smiled, making her blush that much harder. Thank you. Kushina was incapable of speaking further, so she just looked away. Naruto snickered again. After that, the date at Ikaraku went off almost without a hitch. They ate ramen like grand champions, each determined to best the other. Kushina beat him by a single bowl, 40 to his 39. She would have gone for more too, but poor Chuchai ran out of ingredients. Good thing, too. Naruto's wallet was beginning to feel dangerously light. And so, nearing midnight, they departed. Silence was their guide for a time, and Naruto tried to content himself with that. Until they reached Kushina's doorstep. Well, she began, dithering at the door. Would you like to come in, sensei? Just that one word reminded him of how horribly wrong this war. Naruto grimaced. Well, oh, stop fretting. She dragged him inside before he could protest further. He barely had time to take in her ramshackle one-bedroom apartment. Must have been what that door led to in the light, before those lights went off. He was almost grateful for it. Her room might have been neat, but the state of the apartment was something else entirely, the tiny, confined space. No kitchen to speak of. An even smaller fridge that looked like it could barely hold a few quarts of milk, much less that empty carton on the counter. Damn thing, Kushina swore, flicking at the light switch, to no avail. Power's always on the fritz. How the hell do you live here? She shot him a bemused look in the dark. We can't all live in Uptown, Naruto-kun. You should move. Can't, she remarked, hanging up her coat on a nearby rack. On the wages I make, this is all I could afford. Hell, even this dress was a loaner from Mikitoni. Naruto said nothing to that. What could he say? Move in with me. The words came from out of nowhere. Kushina spun around, disbelieving. Anything's better than living in this squalor. That's it. She seemed to consider his offer for a moment. I'd need some convincing to just move in with you, sensei. I could persuade you. You think so? She challenged, planting a hand on her hip. Naruto didn't give her the time to answer. See mirror. She flung the door to her quarters open and swiftly dragged him inside, pulling his shirt as she went. They almost didn't make it to her room. She was too busying him, her hands running over his muscular torso, ghosting along his biceps. His hands were equally as explorative as they struggled to remove her clothes. Kushina grabbed at Naruto's oblong lapels and pulled him towards her as she walked backwards into her room. She clawed at his clothing, trying frantically to remove them. His fingers had already expertly loosened up the clasps of her red dress, the sleeveless garment sliding down around her shoulders and biceps. He pushed her back onto the bed and restrained a chuckle at her blushing face. While she was an extremely talented kunoichi, Kushina Uzumaki was still where the concept of intimacy was concerned. After disrobing, Naruto slid on top of the red-haired shinobi, his mouth slithering a wayward, winding line down her collarbone to her ass, no control. He'd held himself back in her presence for far too long. Now, he gave himself away entirely. His tongue began circling her left nipple before he took it into his mouth, nipping down with his teeth. He heard Kushina inhale sharply above him at this sudden intimacy, making him smile widely as he began move to her right to repeat the action. Once more his tongue slipped out of his mouth, this time garnering a small cry from his intended victim. His mouth found hers again, pinning her to the bed. He felt his heart against her slit. Kushina pressed up against him in need. "I want you," she said, inside. This time, there was no hesitation, no lapse between thought and action. Naruto simply slid back, spread her legs, and slowly lined himself with her sheath. This might hurt. Kushina bit her lip and nodded. Inch by decadent inch he sank into her, claiming her, branding her. When at last he was all the way in, he stilled, strain branching from the corners of his eyes. He felt rather than saw those orbs flash crimson, searing like the chakras he so desperately held in check. The sight of them did not seem to disturb Kushina in the least. She chose that moment to smile, and it was the most beatific thing he'd ever seen. He could barely bring himself to speak, gasping softly over the pain. She purred, "Naruto-kun." The Black Death had to forcibly clench his jaw to keep it from falling off his face. Did Kushina have any notion how damned why she'd sounded just then? His lips found hers, their tongues meeting in a tangled clause of intimacy. His hands rediscovered her kneading. "You feel so good." "Yes, but, more, please." Like this he moved slowly at first, uncertain, hesitant to hurt. Kushina shuddered, quivering with delight. "Yes, please. Yes, exactly like that." He moved faster, faster still. Finally all she could do was wrap her legs around his waist and hold on. He chanted her name over and over, a prayer, a curse, a shuddering he couldn't quite contain. She groaned with sheer pleasure. Every moment, every movement, was perfect, utterly soul-changing. A small whimper escaped from her throat, despite her eyes still being closed and her head remaining tilted back in pleasure. Naruto held on to the moment a tad longer, his eyes sweeping over her body as it heaved up and down with her breaths. Despite his anxiety, he really enjoyed her. She breathed heavily as she moved on top of him, her hips grinding against his pelvis. He pushed back against her, his hands sliding across her flaring hips and grabbing onto her ass. She ate in pleasure at his touch, pushing herself further down upon him. The action caused him to react with his lower body, thrusting upwards and deeper into her. Kushina leaned down and ate him passionately, enjoying the feel of his tongue against hers as she continued to wriggle above him. She rolled away and lay next to him, her smaller hands tugging at him to roll on top of her. With a slight sigh, he obliged and they resumed making love under the cold moon of Konoha. "Kushina, I'm going Toto have to." "Everything," she gasped, her voice building into a keen of utter ecstasy. "Give me everything." A roar left him, his entire body bowing. He hit her as deep as he could possibly go, so wonderfully deep, and yet still she arched up and tried to take him deeper. As he shuddered with completion, satisfaction found her and she cried out, holding him tight, holding on forever. Even minutes later, when he fell upon her, heavy and lax, she refused to let go. When he rolled over, he took her with him and she ended up sprawled on his. That was he began, but lack of breath stole the words from him. "Wow," she breathed, sounding surprised. Wow, her cheeks darkened, her face flushing a shameful pink as her mind finally caught up with her body's reaction to what they had done. She squirmed, not to get away from him but closer to him, burying her head in his. She stayed like that for a long moment, as though she could somehow shelter herself from scrutiny so long as she refused to look at him. Naruto was suddenly struck by how adorable she was, felt his lips curling in a small smile. He had the top of her head, but instead of slumping against him the redhead gave him a predatory grin. "I'm not done with you yet." The two shinobi were soon moving again as Kushina straddled Naruto, taking him in her hands and slowly lowering herself into him once more. Naruto didn't get much sleep that night. He was weary the next morning, but it was a good kind of tired. Instead of meeting in the Hokage's office as per the original mandate that morning, he'd been redirected to the eastern gate instead. So he packed his belongings, donned his uniform, gave the sleeping Kushina and set out to do the impossible once again. Funny how one man could grow used to such a thing. "Nice of you to join us." Inoichi and Shikaku were present to greet him, though the latter's wife was not. "What happened to Yoshino?" he called. "Caught the flu," a lazy Nara admitted with a relieved grin. Naruto cracked a quiet grin at that thought. "Sounds like you got lucky." Makoto was the first to greet him, the heiress all but darting forward to claim his attention. She looked oddly elated, he thought, as though some great and terrible secret were weighing on her mind. Her arms wrapped around his neck, as though she were drawing him in for a. She stopped halfway, her nose brushing his, strands of midnight hair tickling at the bridge of his nose. She grinned, a delighted, terrified look dancing on in those charcoal orbs. She'd stopped him a ways from the others, and he wondered why. Why what she said next answered that question. "There's, something I need to tell you." Naruto tilted his head aside. Yeah, I gathered as much. I'm pregnant. Naruto's jaw dropped, snapped shut with an audible click, then popped open all over again. His mind did the math. It made sense. He'd been with Makoto first, and given all the time they'd spent apart, first and sooner than an 8 weeks of traveling in either direction, it made perfect sense, even to him. That didn't make him any less uncomfortable about it, though his mind refused to comprehend it, yet he knew it was true. Pregnant. The child. Dear sweet Kami Almighty, and above, she was having his child. He began slowly, knees wobbling. I think I'm going to faint. Oh, no you're not. Makoto grabbed him, shaking him like a rag doll. Listen mister, you are going to take responsibility for this, so help me God. Naruto's head lolled aside, a wisp of smoke sticking out of his mouth. How long? A week or two, I suppose. Her pretty pale cheeks colored, a hand drifting down to her stomach. I only noticed because my chakra flow was off. This'll probably be my last mission for a while. Those dark eyes became decidedly misty. This is all your fault, you know. I thought about getting rid of it, but I just can't. Guess we'll have some figuring to do when we get back. Father will probably want to speak with you about this. She'd made up her mind, he realized. But even so, the admittance that she was still going with them rocked the former blonde back on his heels. What no way in hell am I letting you go with us? Her sharing and flared, boring holes through him. Was I asking you for permission? No, dear. Inoichi snickered aside. Whipped. I'm sorry, did you say something? The heiress asked demurely. So, is this it? Is anyone replacing Yoshi? That'd be me. The Uchiha started as a new voice came from behind him. Sakumasen. Naruto inclined his head respectfully toward Kakashi's father. Judging by the scathing look he received, the Haddock remembered their conversation from a few months back. Naruto silently prayed that he wouldn't have to come to blows with him over that. Gray eyes narrowed still further, scrutinizing him. Makoto edged away from him as the senior Jonin drew near, his mouth set in an inscrutable line. Neither spoke for a long moment, each man holding their tongue. Finally, the latter broke it, extending an arm. An olive branch. You know what you're doing, I trust. More than you know. Naruto glanced down at the offered limb for a moment, then he reached down and clasped it. The two men shook briefly, gauging the other's grip. Naruto refused to flinch, pushing still his shock at Makoto's admission to the back of his brain. Fair enough. Just like that, the tension was broken between the two of them. And with that, they set off. Meanwhile, in the land of Earth, Anoki steepled his fingers, stifling a long, drawn-out sigh. He felt old. His tired old bones ached with every movement, his back threatening to spasm as he looked over the paperwork. He wasn't that old, he told himself sternly, but the stress of his work threatened to prove otherwise. That damn Uchiha, did he never rest? Did this onslaught never end? It had taken an intolerable amount of time for him to learn of Konoha's actions and aim another ally gained in the war for fear of their Black Death wiping them out. They were flocking to the leaf one by one, all thanks to that man. And now, if his spies were to be believed, he was heading to the mist, no doubt to find another ally. His relations with the Senju lass were troubling. True, but the way this war was turning, it was being pressured on all sides. As if the man anticipated his every move. Wind and rain were already pressing at their borders, and then there was grass. No, if this continued, they'd be cut off from their supply lines, or worse. They needed to strike before the leaf stifled the earth, leaving them to suffocate. Never, he muttered crossly. I will never allow them to defeat us. With a weary growl, he pulled out another piece of paperwork. This was war, after all. Sometimes exceptions to the rule need to be made. Glancing down at his new edict, he bid a courier carry it to the four corners of his village. It was no mere statement. It was a reward. For the death of that meddlesome Uchiha, that wretch, for the good of Iwa, action must be taken. Uchiha Naruto must be eliminated. Humid. That was Naruto's first thought about the land of water when they stepped off the boat. The mist seemed to close around them like a physical presence, tendrils of foggy water grasping insubstantially at their legs as they waded through the murk. As squad leader, Naruto found himself taking point, trying to banish thoughts of Makoto from his mind. She hadn't spoken to him since they'd left the gates. He was beginning to think that their earlier argument had rankled her somehow. But he couldn't dwell on that now. His focus needed to be on the mission. Anything else could be shoved aside until later. All right, he began, turning to face his team. Just so we're clear, this is a recon and retrieve mission. We'll keep to the border towns to avoid enemy shinobi and try to recruit some of the outlying clans without drawing attention. Avoid combat if you can. If any of us get made, it'll be that much harder to complete the mission. Shikaku stifled a sonorous yawn. And if we do get made, as he looked on, the Uchiha seemed to shimmer with tongues of black flame. A touch of dread stole up the Nara's spine. Until this very moment, he hadn't thought much of the newcomer. He seemed rather high-strung, clashing with his own laid-back attitude. But now, looking at him, he felt something he hadn't experienced since his genin days. Fear, peering into those soulless black eyes, watching them turn the color of, it gave him a dark chill. The wrath in those eyes would have put poor Yoshino to shame. I'll take care of it, he said, simply. How? Simple. You'll learn how I got my nickname. He answered, the Y orbs of his taijutsu fading from sight once more. Pray that you never see it. It took a physical effort for him to focus after that. But using disguised shadow clones. Naruto was just finishing up as he came back to himself. I've already sent out 3 to scout the perimeter. With any luck we'll find O. He jerked in midspeak, spasming. Makoto was at his side in an instant. What happened? They took out all three. He murmured to himself. I wasn't expecting that. Who? Kaguya. Silence stole over the group. The Kaguya Inoichi gulped, shattering the seemingly impassable void. As in that group of bone-wielding battle maniacs, it was impossible not to know of them. Nearly every village had a file on the crazed line bone benders. Supposedly they were isolated to the land of water, constantly causing trouble and strife along the border of the village. Even so, no one had expected to encounter them. Finding the Kaguya should have been like finding a needle in a haystack. Wholly impossible. Yet here they were, as if fate had just thrust them in front of his face. The very same. In the end, Sakumo decided to speak. What do you want to do? Let them come to us, Naruto said, stifling his immediate urge to confront the bone wielders purely out of curiosity. All right, disguises. Use henge only if necessary. We don't want them detecting any chakra pulses or the like. Tugging up his cloak, he started forward, leaving them to follow. Pressing on, they soon left the dock behind, then the road itself. It wasn't long at all before they came to the first of many towns, a ramshackle assortment of buildings that looked little more than hovels and in great need of repair. Cozy, Inoichi remarked. Shut your trap and move. Sakumo barked. We're in enemy territory here. They entered something of a shantytown, decrepit and falling apart. Naruto felt something in him wrench as he gazed upon the beggars within, absently tossing them a few ryu as he passed. Their cries of thanks were all the more made painful by the knowledge that he couldn't do anything for them. Kami, Mikoto whispered behind him. Fist eyes. The Black Death fought down his gorge and reached reflexively for his coin purse. Stay on track, he told himself. You can't save them all, not with coins at any rate. There will be time for these once Higura is gone. So easy to say, so hard to practice. Ignoring the piteous crease which only became louder once the beggars realized he was watching them, Naruto studied each face in turn. He tried switching his emotions off. It didn't work. Not at all. You'll excuse me, mister. He glanced down, his tiny hand closed around his pant leg. The feeble tug was just enough to attract his attention. He found himself staring down at a fair-haired little girl, perhaps all of 10 years old. His heart broke into 1,000 pieces at the sight of her. The thin rags she wore didn't even deserve to be called such, as they were little more than scraps of clothing. Her hair might have been black or maybe a very dark purple, but he couldn't tell beneath the dirt caking her tresses or face. Her skill was dark, but what held him were the eyes. They were a deep, soulful saffron, much as his own were when he used sage mode. Something broke inside of him. Do you have any food? She asked quietly. I haven't eaten in a week. Bah, Yummy snorted. She'll survive. Heartless. Hey, don't, Inoichi began. S.H. Mikoto hissed, swatting his hand. Let him be. Too late. Naruto was crouching down almost before he knew what was happening. He let his eyes flash red, sharing and searching the girl for any sign of chakras or weapons. He found none. If she was an assassin sent to kill him, then she was a damn good one. Behind him, he could hear Shikaku fretting quietly. They must have looked quite the sight, 5 cloaked individuals, standing in one place. Who knew what kind of attention they must have attracted? Naruto didn't care. In that instant, he only had eyes, only had concern, for the poor child staring up at him. What's your name? Yoruichi, the child answered, staring unflinchingly at his eyes. Wow, those golden eyes of hers were positively eerie. Where are your parents? Don't have any, she replied, slightly lisping the words. My mama died when I was little. My dad was a shinobi. He drank a lot. One day he didn't wake up. Naruto, that did it. Yes. Naruto pulled off his cloak and threw it aside in a whirlwind of motion, exposing the Konoha fatigues and the headband beneath. The effect was immediate. The little girl stared up at him, goggle-eyed. Remarkably, she didn't run. Her hands seemed to be frozen, her mouth hanging open in a wide, round O of surprise. What are you doing? Sakumo hissed. The right thing. That's them. Just like that, they were surrounded. Dozens of faces, some shinobi, others not, glared back at him. Naruto wasn't surprised. Higura's paranoia was legendary. He'd known all about the shinobi, watching them from the moment they set foot into town. What he hadn't been expecting was their expressions. These weren't the faces of proud shinobi, these were the faces of exhaustion. He saw men, women, and children who'd been browbeaten into following orders, depression etched into their eisne, their very souls. He saw genin, chunin, even a few jonin amongst them. None of them looked like they wanted to fight. Hell, all the fight had probably been kicked out of them by their mad Mizukage. Whoa there! Naruto rose and held up his hands in a placating effort. Yoruichi ducked behind his leg, and an arm moved instinctively to shelter the little girl. We're not here to attack you, we come in peace. Why would Konoha send the Black Death on a mission of peace? A young boy shouted. You're here to wipe us out, aren't you? The response was deafening. A chorus of angry murmurs greeted those words. Mikoto muttered under her breath, sharing and flicking from one end of the angry mob to the other. I hope you've got a plan, dear, because this isn't looking good. It would have been fine if someone didn't have a bleeding heart, Sakumo grumbled. You just had to fall for the teary eyes, didn't why? Naruto decked him. The sudden blow sent the whitehead stumbling back and silenced the crowd, and the whitehead as well. Naruto stepped forward, his hand closing around the man's jacket. I will never, ever, turn my back on those in need, he hissed, Sharingan flaring. Those who break the rules and abandon their friends are S. Those who ignore the weak and helpless are worse than S. With a disgusted grunt, he shoved the older man away. Troublesome, Shikaku muttered, eyes narrowing. Naruto frowned, remembered where he was, quietly steeling himself. Now was not the time for action. He needed words to placate these people, not fists. But first, I'm here of my own volition, in case you all haven't noticed, folks. He supplicately burning holes into the first agitator with his eyes. I know you. You're Utakata. When the youth bristled, his own smile grew. The container of the Rokubai. I'll wager you don't much care for your own life, being a loyal shinobi of Kirigakure, and whatnot, so I'll say it again, I'm not here to cause trouble. Boo, if you try and go biju on me, I'm going to stomp all 6 tails off you faster than you can say Seiken. Understand? Before the baffled boy could dare to speak out again, the Uchiha whirled away from him. Now then, he clapped his hands together, producing a loud pop of sound. Anyone who'd like to leave the Mad Mizukage rule is welcome to come and leave with us. Just raise your hand and I give you my solemn vow, no harm will come to you. There was a silence. Inoichi sighed, pushing a hand through his hair. Look, I appreciate your enthusiasm and all, but these people aren't like those Kagui you're planning to meet. You can't just promise them something like a good battle and then expect them to. Listen. His words trailed off a lone hand stuck out of the back of the crowd. You there vindicated, Naruto's gaze snapped to that hand. Please, step forward. Yukina, one of them, protested. You can't trust them. Anything's better than living like this. The quiet voice supplied, almost reed-like in quality. Stand aside. Naruto nearly barked out a laugh as he watched a young Amanist the Byakuganai help the girl to the front of the crowd. It was impossible to miss the difference. Those doe brown eyes, that heart-shaped face, raven black hair. He almost did a happy little jig right then and there because he was looking at Haku's mother. The resemblance was too uncanny for it to be anything else but a direct relation. Part of him crowed happily. Yukina was it. I as well. He spotted a shock of auburn in his peripherals and his heart leapt. May Terumi, the woman who would one day be Mizukage though a great deal younger, stood across from him. Jadden eyes bored into his, hard, unflinching. She wasn't yet the calm woman he remembered from the Warthi's girl was all edge and anger. There was a gleam in those green orbs that he didn't remember, though her blooming figure still drew a light flush to his cheeks. And who might you be, he asked, schooling his face into an impassive mask. My name isn't important, she answered. But we, she continued, could use your help. What do you need from me? Edgura needs a cure. I fail to see how this involves me. Naruto replied, suddenly realizing what she wanted. Now that he remembered it, she'd fought to establish order in the mist after Edgura fell. It made sense that would still be among her primary goals. Please lift the curse that is ailing our Mizukage. Naruto stared at her for a moment, this girl who would one day blossom into the beautiful flower of the hidden mist. His eyes traced her outstretched hand, narrowed. His hand was suddenly in hers, shaking, reminding him just how much he had admired this woman in the future. Nothing more could have made Naruto's day. I will. Good. Her tone left no admission that she might have ever thought otherwise. Then I hope for your sake, Black Death, that you live up to your title as an army killer. What? And then something answered him. A deafening crash shook the town right down to its very roots, sending soft, subtle shivers of fear shooting through the earth. In the distance a roar reverberated, a terrible wail of undiluted fury that promised pain and suffering for whatever hapless soul found itself trapped in the creature's path. It sounded as though hell itself had been unleashed upon them, a deafening rumble that shook both heaven and earth. Shikaku gulped. What was that? That, May smiled, is the sound of the sandbai. Inoichi's response summed up Naruto's thoughts quite nicely. The tiniest of changes alter everything. Even the smallest ripple, the merest of thoughts, can change the world. Paradise or perdition, peace and war, heaven, hell. When one seeks to alter the past, they must be prepared for such things, not just the change in the life of one era, but the lives of many. And when those changes are many, well, let's have a look at them, shall we? Whilst Naruto and his men fought and died in the land of water, in Konoha, the changes he had wrought began to bear fruit. All those earth-shattering changes, silent for so long, began to move once again. Some of his seemingly inconsequential decisions, simple acts of kindness, bore fruit in his absence. Lives were lost. Alliances were gained. Bonds bound and unbound. Some might call this an interlude, the calm before the storm. That dreadful moment of peaceful, complacent silence before the plunge into the abyss. Call it what you will, dear reader, but it is, nevertheless, an integral part of the story. Every fiber of her being told Pecura to run. Run, flee, get away from here. She wanted to bolt. She'd faced down assassins, distant envoys from foreign nations. She'd gone toe-to-toe with enemy shinobi, been wrangled into an unexpected marriage as a consort, and impossibly, found love and the very strong possibility of a child, if she judged her courses correct there in the hidden leaf. Her life had been laid out on the line countless times, and each time she had done her duty without fear, without hesitation. Run, 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 run. Yet the prospect of this, of walking into unfamiliar territory, was enough to make her shake like a leaf itself, sending anxious tremors shooting up and down her spine. She wished Naruto were here to comfort her, but no, he was off in the mist playing hero, taking some of the leaf's bestand Mikoto with him. Pecura didn't begrudge him his actions, far from it. She admired his determination and dedication to the village. He was fierce as a tiger when it came to keeping their home, but she would have sincerely appreciated a little of that heartfelt sincerity for herself right about now. The thought of going in there, without weapons, not being allowed to use her line to defend herself, it was terrifying. Pecura fidgeted nervously at the thought. "This is a horrible idea," she muttered to herself, clutching the book to her. "Absolutely horrible. Why did I agree to this?" She felt strange enough in her new flak jacket and Konoha attire, Hoshi resting quite uncomfortably around her neck like a noose, but the reassurance that she was now officially, as a gallant Jiraiya had put it, part of the family did precious little to quell the nauseating butterflies fluttering about within her. Indeed, the idea of entering a hot zone like this threatened to send her breakfast lurching back. Upperk. She leaned against the wall for support, stubbornly steeling herself. "That better not be morning sickness. No, it's too early. It shouldn't even be possible." Having second thoughts, a startled gasp forced itself between her lips. Sakura spun around with a start, startled to find that she wasn't alone. Hokage-sama, Sarutobi Hiruzen, divested of his hat and robes, smiled pleasantly at her. "I thought I'd see how you were doing. You're going to be late, you know." Without the vestments of his office, he looked very much like a simple civilian. Sakura thought, though she knew in her heart nothing could be further from the truth. "So I just have to tell them what to do." "Not too much," he advised. "You have to smile and wave at them, too." She groaned in horror, and Sarutobi, hearing this, chuckled in grandfatherly amusement. "You'll do just fine." With all her might, she fought the urge to hiss at the chuckling old man. He was the one who'd suggested this in the first place, tricked her, bamboozled. The memory was not a fond one. Just thinking about it was enough to get her hot and bothered all over again. If she'd know this was to be her fate, she'd never have stepped in that blasted office to begin with. Slowly his gaze shifted to Sakura. The Kunoichi looked back, blinked, and asked, "What?" Sarutobi began to smile. Really smile. Understandably, Sakura was somewhat nervous at this. Tsunade looked at them and suddenly had the same thought. "Well, I can't do it. I'm busy with the medical corps, and she's the only one who has any real knowledge of Suna and their techniques. But we're allies now." They gave her a stern look. "But for how long?" Tsunade pressed. "Once this war ends. That aside, she would make a fine replacement," the Hokage agreed equably. Sakura was horrified, but she couldn't see an escape. "Now just a minute. I understand congratulations are in order in that regard." Sakura bristled, drawn back to bitter, painful reality by those easy words. Did he know about the impending wedding, or the fact maybe just Mabesh was with child? No, that wasn't possible. Not even Naruto knew a thing about that. Who knew? Naruto venerated the old man regardless, though she couldn't fathom why. She supposed the least she could do was feign a smile for him. "Why, thank you." Hiruzen glanced at Sakura, who was still watching the door like a cat at a mouse hole. A foreign Kunoichi was not easy to manipulate, and Sakura had proven surprisingly resistant to the idea, but now that she was here she seemed to be just looking for an excuse to bolt. Thankfully, the bell rang before she could do just that. "Well, go on then. Hate this, hate this, hate this so much." Gathering her materials in hands, she pushed open the doors and stepped inside, painfully aware of them swinging shut behind her as she stepped into the classroom. Heart beating like a jackhammer, she mentally willed herself to calm down lest she panic. Once there, she faced down the horde of little monsters, ate in a breath, and began. "Hello, my name is Sakura." She gazed out on the sea of young faces and forced herself to continue before they could start asking questions about her or the infamous Black Death that would soon be her husband. One never knew what manner of questions a child would ask, after all. "And, as of today, I will be your instructor in the art of ninjutsu." Quietly, she prayed that Kushina was faring better with her assigned task than she. He did what? Kushina was not, in fact, faring better. She was faring worse. Much worse. "Well, I may have that's my ear. Hihiko had the good sense of mind to cringe as Kushina dutifully dabbed at his cheek, savagely scrubbing away the dirt and grit and pain off his face. He was also smart enough to keep his yapper shut when she frog-marked him off the porch and into the living room, away from the Anbu who had just so rudely shown up with the orphans in tow. Neither had the gal the lack of common sense to snap at the Jinchuriki when she kicked the door shut in their faces. "Stop struggling, kid," Ibiki called from his perch on the couch, glancing up from his book just long enough to catch the boy's eye. "You'll only make it worse on yourself." Nwaki barked a laugh of his own, glancing up from his garden out back. "What did they do this time?" he called. "That's what I intend to find out, Titebane." Kushina spared him a glance and a rueful smile. With only a few weeks of practice under his belt, he was coming into his own and making excellent use of his Mokuten towering tree in the back certainly bespoke to his blossoming skills. Their current living arrangements were still woefully small for her liking, considering that Naruto was temporarily forcing them to share an apartment with Hihiko and the others while he was gone. At least it was better than the Uchiha compound. Ugh, she shuddered at the thought. Mikitoni was like a sister to her, but the way some of her clanmates looked at her behind her back, calling her demon, whore and the likeish, simply didn't feel comfortable there, despite Naruto and Mikoto's efforts to make it to the contrary. Not too much longer, she reminded herself. Naruto, until he'd left for the mist, had been hard at work constructing a home for them all, this strange little family of theirs. Even with his absence, he'd hired a number of capable craftsmen to continue his work. Kushina had been sworn to silence, promised that she would not peek, but in the end, she, like Hoshi and the others, had given in to temptation. She'd seen the grand manner taking shape. It was glorious. She couldn't wait to move in with him. Around her she still heard the occasional SC of a saw in the distance, the pounding of a hammer and the shouts of the foreman. The finished product would be a sight to see, indeed, but for now, Stay, she called at Nagato and Conan, seeing them slinking off out of the corner of her eye. I'll deal with you two later. Then her eyes locked back on Yuhiko. The poor boy paled. He and his fellow orphans were indeed noticeably absent from class today, not because of the respective age gap between them and their fellow students, nor simply because Naruto wasn't there to supervise them, but due to the trio's most recent misadventure. Without the Uchiha's watchful eye on him, Yuhiko seemed to get into all sorts of mischief, oftentimes dragging poor Nagato and Conan along for the ride. Ordinarily, this wouldn't have been too much of an ordeal for those tasked with watching him. Today, however, Kushina intended to find out just what he'd done, post-haste. Tell me, or what he challenged, grinning. When Nagato opened his mouth to answer, he shot him a glower. Quiet, you, just because she's your cousin or whatever, or I will bite you, Kushina continued, looming over him now as her hair swayed in some unseen breeze, eyes aglint with wrath. Not with my teeth, though. That'd be rude. With my fingers. How do fingers bite, you ask, she asked, grinning at his questing look. Simple, chump. The resulting squeal of laughter nearly sent Conan and Nagato giggling as well. Not Yuhiko. Okay, it was just a little prank. And what does that mean, Kushina asked, grinning as she continued to tickle him. Stubborn to the end, the orphan resisted. Guess. No, tell me, she insisted, her smirk growing at the mere mention of mischief. I hate guessing. Besides, I'm in charge of you while Naruto-kun is away. You have to, unless you want me to keep tickling after what felt like an eternity of this. The boy's resistance crumbled. All right, I give. I shouldn't have to tell you, though. Come on. Yuhiko smirked triumphantly. I painted the stone faces. Kushina gawped. You did not. Did too. Did not. Kushina and Conan intervened gently, trying unsuccessfully not to laugh. He did. She pointed out the window for emphasis. There was a blur of red and cyan as everyone scrambled out to see the boys work. A moment of terrible silence, punctuated by the sound of Sumong Tring and failing to stifle her glorious giggles. Okay, that was pretty good. Yuhiko grinned at them, resplendent with joy. What can I say, I'm brilliant. Cara also felt that she was quite brilliant. Every step felt as though she were walking on cloud nine, upswings of confidence boosting her normally pitiful self-esteem to wondrous new heights. She felt as though she could shout from the rooftops. Perhaps it had something to do with the tiny creature perched upon her right shoulder, the wholehearted knowledge that she'd finally gotten the scorpions to accept her at long last. Months of painful training and agonizing anxiety had paid off in full, made visible by the little black scorpion known as Kuro, a fitting name, all things considered, seated firmly on her back. She could have chosen to ride on a larger summons like a sashi, but that would have been rude. All of her hard work had been paid back in spades. She, like her mother before her, was now the proud successor of her family, a full-fledged summoner. Against all odds, she'd successfully summoned the scorpions and only just yesterday forged a contract with their leader. She was now worthy to summon them as she wished. Words alone could not hope to express the extent of her joy, her bliss, the knowledge that she was making something of herself. Someone. Oh, this is so wonderful. A little twirl in the aisle nearly sent poor Kuro spinning off her shoulder and flying into a bookshelf. The tiny summons hissed his indignation as he clung to her for dear life. Hey, watch it, he jabbed at her with his stinger, eliciting a tiny twinge in her cheek. Even the pinprick of pain wasn't enough to deter Cara. Sorry, she grinned, resisting the urge to jump again and raise her voice in the quiet halls. She couldn't wait to tell Naruto-kun, to show him all she'd learned, but that would have to wait until he returned from the mist, and until then, he'd assigned her a terribly important task. He claimed to trust no one else with this, a task uniquely suited to her, what some might have once called unimpressive Haskell sets. Why, you ask? Because Cara loved to read. It was such a silly thing, really, and it had seemed so unimportant at the time. Ever since she'd been a little girl, she'd loved books, more so after the death of her mother. Book indeed. History itself were a safe haven into which one might retreat. In books you could escape, leave behind the world for another, happier one even. She retreated into them, seeking sanctuary and solace when none were to be found in the real world. It could even be said that she loved them. She loved Konoha's library even more. There was so much knowledge here, tales of time long past in the village immemorial. Photographic memory was something prized by Konoha, and Kara's mind was right up there with the best. Unlike most, she had but to read something once, and then it was forever burned into her brain. Naturally, it wasn't a perfect process. She could only memorize so much in a single day, but for the mission assigned her, she was certain a day was all she would need. Maybe two. Naruto had asked, completed really, as they lay in bed one morning after a rapturous bout lovemaking her to research Konoha's history, as well as any pertinent information related to clans with unique lines. Though she may have been the most soft-spoken of the group, this was where her other talents shone. With that thought, she returned her attention to the shelves, adding another volume to the ever-growing stack she held in her arms. She was determined to read them all before Naruto returned. So fixated was she on said task, she almost failed to notice when someone else rounded the bend, until, "Oof, hey, not again," Kuro squealed. A startled cry as in the books went flying out of her arms, launched skyward. Cara instinctively braced herself, but a feminine grunt answered her, followed by several muted thuds. When she dared to open her eyes at her intrepid attacker, she found herself staring up into shockingly bright green eyes, framed by shockingly pink locks. And there, nestled firmly in either hand, held like massive seething platters, were books. Her books actually, but her eyes were soon drawn elsewhere. Clearly attuned by her garb, the intruder seemed almost bemused by her accident now that it had ended, a small smile playing at her otherwise pale face. Her figure was almost boyish, enough to make Cara feel well endowed by comparison in her simple blouse and skirt. Her jaw clicked open a bit, her neck flushing at the thought. "Arethy's yours?" the Konoichi asked at last. "Oh, yes, thank you ever so much, miss." Haruno, the pinkette grinned, setting the books down on a nearby table and offering a hand. "Haruno Mabuki." Cara beamed, happily accepting the offered palm. "And Cara, pleased to meet you." Cara, the pinkette's head tilted, considering. Then revelation dawned. "Ah, it's you." The brunette blinked, momentarily baffled. "Yeah, you're the one with the scorpion contract, right?" Her eyes shifted to the minute Kiro still perched on her shoulder. "Gotta she swiftly withdrew her finger when the scorpion took a stab at the digit. "Oh, you're a feisty little thing. You'd think I could learn to summon one of them. I've always been fascinated with summoning jutsu, but we've had so few contracts until recently." Cara blinked again, momentarily taken aback by the inundation of words. Quite the chatterbox. This girl, she seemed amiable enough though, and the gleam in her eyes was sincerely earnest. Cara beamed, suddenly inspired. "I suppose I could teach you." She'd never felt so confident in all of her life. Confidence. There was a time when Hoshi had quailed at such a word. The first time she ever saw Naruto, her heart caught in her throat and her stomach dropped faster than one could say love at first sight. She'd been captivated, awed and knocked sideways by the depth of her feelings for this strange man. In many ways, it felt as though she knew him, as though some small part of her soul were rejoicing at seeing a long-lost friend, a lover, come back home. Perhaps that was when the first seed of her newfound confidence had truly been planted, or perhaps much later. Whatever the case, confidence felt good. Damned good. Hoshi had never understood the concept of such a thing until recently because, before she'd met Naruto, she'd had none. A life of high expectations and constant ridicules had worn her down over time, grounded both her mind and spirit until she felt like little more than an ant in the eyes of the elders. Yet in the space of less than a year, he'd built that tiny anthill of her self-esteem into a towering mountain, tall and implacable. She felt no shame in admitting that she needed the encouragement, someone to believe in her, encourage her. Just one person was all it took. Indeed, she felt proud now, strong, confident, not arrogant, mind you, like other members of her house, but enough for her to brush off the dust on her skills, polish them up, spread her wings and soar. That was why, today, Hayashi found himself eating fist for breakfast. He'd come into the spar expecting a swift and decisive victory before the watchful eyes of the Hyuga elders. He was completely unprepared for the right hook that came screaming out of nowhere to why his nose. It was the second happiest day in Hoshi Hyuga's life, the first being when Naruto had offered to better instruct her on her taijutsu. She'd thought it odd then that he knew so much of the gentle fist style, and still did now, but that tiny worry was overshadowed by the dull carrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr this. What is the meaning of this? His voice emerged as nasal whine, angry and harsh. That was not the traditional style. A haze of discontented murmurs rose up from the assembled elders. Hoshi scoffed. The elders could go hang because she wasn't here to prove herself for them or the right of succession. She was doing this for herself. That shy, stuttering girl was no more, and today she would show them all. Of course it wasn't, she replied primly, bouncing on the ass of her feet. It's a new style. My style. Why you? He sputtered, lunging. Too slow. Hoshi flowed like water, rippling around the blow and driving her outstretched palm deep into the man's solar plexus. Hayashi dropped with an audible wheeze. That was all it took. There was no need for a follow-through. Indeed, the second attack wasn't even necessary. Had she truly hit him that hard, surely she must have, for her opponent lay curled into a fetal position upon the floors, emptying the contents of his stomach onto the ground. She nudged him with her foot and was completely prepared when he lunged up and struck out at her. Titan. What followed at Hayashi wishing he'd stayed down. Hoshi spun, blindingly fast, expelling chakra from every pore. At such range, the rotation cut ribbons of flesh from him, smashed him into the ground, and all but launched him into the compound wall with a harsh crunch. Then she waltzed right up to him and did it again. The elder Hyuga gave a truncated half-grunt, half-squeal, as he was propelled into the air a good foot and a half before being flattened a moment later just outside the compound. Hoshi calmly stepped out after him, his swaying, the slight tack of her footfalls eliciting a sharp flinch from the male. He was afraid of her, she realized. She could see it in his eyes. This knowledge gave her just the slightest bit of pleasure. It did. The man who, in a different age, might have once been her husband, barely managed to raise his head at her approach. I won't kill you unless it's absolutely necessary. Hoshi had her head aside like a dog listening to a new sound, an innocent smile wreathing her pretty face. Will it be necessary? Hayashi tried to reply, but all that his body would surrender was a small, squeaking negative. Where had this confounded confidence come from? I'm waiting. Hayashi blanched. And no, not at all. then concede. Yerk. The words died in his throat as her foot crushed down on his groin. All the men and a few of the women winced as the ensuing crack. Hayashi's voice jumped 3 octaves, then he collapsed upon himself like a snail into its shell. Every man in the courtyard, with the exception of Hoshi herself, winced anew. That stomp would have dropped a bear. Concede. She smiled sweetly. He did, in fact. He conceded all rights to her, and forfeited his potential claim as head before the venerate eyes of the elders themselves. A stretcher was brought out to carry the disgraced Hyuga away, and that, as they said, was that. That was amazing, Nisama. Hoshi felt her first real, non-threatening smile of the day bloom as Nozomi squealed, leaping to her feet. Oh, sister, you look wonderful. He didn't hurt you at all. Did he let me see? She hurried over to examine her best friend and most cherished sibling from all angles, even going so far as to run a quick hand over her ass. Hoshi startled, her pale face flushing at the bold behavior from her normally shy sister. Thus embattled, she swatted the hand away. Nozomi, her sister giggled, her cheeks pink with delight. Sorry, I don't know what's gotten into me. I've just never seen you like that. It was so inspiring, say. Then her eyes narrowed. Hoshi gulped. Yuho. She knew that look. It was the look that look was nothing good. Sure enough, when Nozomi spoke again, her normally quiet voice had dropped to a lustrous purr. I hear you and Naruto were spending an awful lot of time together before he left. Oh, I hear wedding bells. Hoshi sputtered. Don't you have a mission with Minato-san in a few hours? Nozomi brightened. Oh, right I do. I simply must get ready. She watched her go, noticing the slight spring in her little sister's step. Nozomi was practically glowing, such was her glee. And outgoing now, too. Hoshi wondered about that. She'd known for some time that the last Namikaze was wooing her sibling, though she suspected they were for reasons untoward. But this was different. At Minato finally her eyes bulged slightly, tingling with the Byakugan. He had Hoshi's jaw open to tell her sister, then closed again, thinking better of it. No, it was not her place to tell her sister that she was with child. It was still very early, and likely wouldn't be noticed without undue scrutiny until a few weeks. The clan would likely not approve, any more than they did of her so-called dalliance with the rising star of the Uchiha clan. Maker, that was going to a bitter battle once she broke the news to them. The thought made her sigh, not just for herself and Naruto, but for the agony she knew her sister would one day have to endure to get what she wanted. That, of course, assumed Minato wouldn't break her heart. I wonder how he's doing. Jiraiya was waiting for Minato when he reached the training grounds. He'd meant to get in a bit of a warm-up before his mission this evening. Fate had other plans. A cold knot of dread wound itself up inside the Chunin's gut when he saw his old mentor perched upon the log. He hadn't been expecting the recently crowned Sannin to simply appear out of thin air. Worse, his face was set in a no-nonsense frown, a sure sign trouble was afoot. Idly, he noticed the older man had a large scroll unfurled in hand. He seemed to be reading it, but at the sound of his approach he snapped it shut and placed it firmly against his back. He was not smiling. Sit on, kid. But, sit. It was not a question, nor was the finger stabbing at the log. Minato reluctantly complied, taking a place beside his mentor. For a long moment, both master and student were silent. A chill breeze pushed through the browning grass of the field, heralding winter. The blonde bit back a shiver despite his long sleeves, for the chill bit to the bone. But no so much as what came next. We need to talk. About what? That look. It reminded him that his sensei was more than a self-proclaimed super pervert who enjoyed writing dirty novels and watching hot springs. He was an accomplished ninja, and when he was serious, enemies fell before like wheat from chaff. That deadly intense glare lasted all of a moment longer before collapsing on itself. Minato. Jiraiya looked briefly miserable and then determined. I understand that you're banging the daylights out of that Hyuga girl. I understand that you're still pining after Kushino despite that fact. I understand that you don't like Naruto. Not yet. He swiftly held up a hand to forestall the imminent argument. But look, I suppose what I'm trying to say is this. You need to ease up. Whether you like him or not, he's done a hell of a lot of good for the village. You know it, I know it, and so does Kushina. See, there's the look again. You do still care about her, don't you? Yet you don't see any problem in playing with someone's heart. Minato waffled, choosing silence over an answer. Jiraiya pressed on. He's good for her, you know. He doesn't seem to care about her situation. And that's good. For her odd, Jiraiya thought. His apprentice sounded oddly calm. For everyone, he answered, trying to ignore the sudden unease he'd just felt. He's not a bad person. Damn, I don't think he has an evil bone in his body. But these inquiries you're making, all these missions you've been taking from Koharu and Amira, this trouble you seem so intent on stirring up, I need to know that it'll end here. We can't afford that division now. I can forgive you for what happened that one night, but trust me when I say you need to put this behind you. This kind of anger, it'll eat you up inside until there's nothing left. Oh, Minato drawled dangerously. You forgive me. Jiraiya stiffened. Something awful was going to happen. Forgive me. Hey, he exploded like an elemental grenade. Well, your forgiveness, and you too, teach, Minato screamed out as he leapt up from the log, gesturing explicitly with both hands. None of you understand. He's nothing, nobody yet after only a few months. Most of the village worships the ground he walks on. Ha, he laughed, then, and it was an ugly, sad, bitter thing. He just swooped in and Kushina changed. She wouldn't even give me the time of day after that. You don't understand. All she wanted was him. I wasn't nothing to her. Now too can't stand it. I hate it, and no one thinks to question who he really is, what he's up to in the first place. The Sanin's mouth dropped open in shock. He'd had no idea. So off Minato shouted, I don't give a shit about your forgiveness. You, or anyone else, I don't need it, I don't want it, you can take it and shove. And then he was there, closing on his student before he could spout treasonous things. The air rushed out of Minato in a wheeze, replaced by the pain of the knuckles pressing into his stomach. He doubled over against a limb, gasping for breath and finding none. I see I've been too gentle with you. The sage sighed. With all his remaining strength, Minato raised his gaze to glare up at his sensei. What does that mean? The man's sweet, sinister smile was possibly the most terrifying, horrifying thing he'd ever seen. It means your new training begins now. Web. Jiraiya's hand descended mercilessly, knifing into the boy's neck with such force that the boy only saw a blur. The Sanin sighed softly above him, tusking like a disappointed parent. Then Minato felt himself being lifted, as though he weighed no more than an impertinent child, slung over the man's shoulder. A series of faint, admonished words rose, vanishing like a dream. You weren't ready, after all. We'll have to work on that. Don't worry, I'll leave a note for Nazumikan. Minato groaned, insensate where he lay. Where are you taking? We're going on a bit of a trip, you and I, came the reply. Don't worry, I'm going to bring you back to your senses, or die trying. I owe your pa that much, at least. Another groan. Got him it. Leave it to Jiraiya-sensei to lead him into another training trap. It's a trap. Those words felt like the understatement of a lifetime, but they described the situation perfectly in the land of water. Don't just stand there, move, 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 get behind me now, water users in the back, earth in front, Makoto. You two come on, people, moove it. Naruto barked out orders even as the forest around them bristled with enemy ninja. Puddles vomited Kirigaki shinobi like watery roaches, others bounding in from branches and boughs with startling speed. Just as swiftly, Naruto created 24 clones of feet that got him his fair share of stunned looks and directed them to herd the civilians and other non-combatants to the south. Anyone not willing to fight, stay back, he shouted. We'll hold the line. And just how do you plan to do that? Sakumo drawled, irate. We can't fight an army. Naruto rounded on him, eyes flashing. I'm not going to let these people be massacred if you don't like it. You can sawed off Inoichi Shikaku, slow them down, I don't care how you do it. Thankfully both men set about doing just that without questioning him. Kakashi's father proved more mulish than most. This is suicide, Sakumo pressed, shoving forward. You know that we need to retreat now. Then kill me and take command. Black met silver, and for a terrifying moment, neither yielded. Finally, the white fang backed down. The man uttered a litany of foul words but held his ground and did not flee. Damn kid. In that case, need to take out as many of them as we can before Thathan gets here. I hope you have a plan. Naruto grimaced. Oh, I have a few ideas, Yami chirped. Naruto nearly backhanded him for his temerity. No, we're not using that. If I bring down a meteor here, it would kill everyone. For once, I'm inclined to agree, came the strange, smoke-railing through Honi voice. We're here to save lives, not end them. Bah, you're no fun, either of you. With those unhelpful hints, Naruto was left alone in his mind to face the oncoming horde. In the distance he could sense their master thundering forward, unseen, but very much heard. Yagura, the Sanbai. Damn, but how was he going to fight that? Biju versus Biju was one thing, but he hadn't perfected the Susanoo up to the point where he was confident in taking on a tailed beast. But it seemed that decision was about to be taken from him. He'd be on them soon, assuming his men didn't finish the job. He was just beginning to wonder how on earth he was going to fight and avoid that many without casualties when... Hold, Konoha shinobi, a stringent voice called. I would speak with you. Head snapped around in alarm. Interestingly enough, the clamor of the Sanbai in the distance appeared to have stopped. So too did Shikaku and Inoichi's sabotage. The enemy force had clamored to a halt, much to their surprise. Instead of swarming them, which would have been easy given their considerable numbers, the Kirigaki shinobi had halted a few paces out. Even from this distance, Naruto counted at least several dozen, perhaps even 100. His stomach sank. Killing such a force was well within his power, but he was loath to risk losing anyone. And he would lose some of them, of that much he was certain. A figure stepped out from the sea of angry faces before things could get out of hand. Please, he began aloud, arms spread in mollification, there's no need to wire our hands. Let us be civilized about this. Naruto frowned. They drew him aside and hissed angrily in his ear, her green eyes fierce. Be careful, that Sugu of the swift release. Yagura's right-hand man, if he's here. Then he's the real deal. Do you let your women speak for you? Black Death, the man called. Come, let us speak as equals. In another life, Naruto would have rose to the challenge and started shouting. Years of war had tempered him, however. All that emerged from his stony facade was a frown. Don't-Mei argued, grabbing his arm as he stepped forward. Sugu's a snake, rotten to the core. Just kill him and be done with it. Ordinarily, he would have granted such a request, but with so many eyes on them, the fate of so many innocents hanging in the balance. Sorry, that's not my way. They met in the middle, Naruto with Mikoto on his left, Sakumo at his right. They took a moment, then with a quiet curse of Baka hurried after them. The ambassador, as it were, came forward alone, with no one at his back. Either this was a sign of supreme arrogance, or Sugu was exceptionally skilled. Hands at either side, he held no weapons. His eyes took stock of them each in turn, lingering on the women just a touch longer than was necessary, Naruto thought. If Sugu was at all aware of the killing intent, he did precious little to show it. Then he seemed to notice Naruto as though waking from an ephemeral dream. His eyes danced with intrigue. Naruto's first impression was that he seemed quite ordinary. Nice, even. He was tall, clad in the signature Kiri uniform of most jonin, with frameless glasses resting on his long face. The eyes behind the lenses were narrow lines, which made it seem as though he were smiling all the time. He was quite young, not yet 30 by Naruto's estimation. Sugu extended a hand to him. And so we meet at last. I'm Sugu Nabayuki. You must be the Black Death we've heard so much about. Your reputation precedes you. The pleasure is mine. Naruto made a point of accepting the offered limb and shaking, much to Mikoto's dismay. Interestingly enough, there was no poisoned dagger to greet him. Let's get down to business. We have no intention of going to war with you, we just want to get these people. And here he glanced back to Yukina and the others, out of here safely. They looked as though she were about to protest, but a harsh glare sent her words packing. I see. Sugu frowned. And you've allied yourself with this rogue, his eyes cut to Mei. That makes things between complicated, then. Such a pity, Terumi. I rather enjoyed working with you. The feeling isn't mutual. Mei hissed. Whatever you say. Sugu rubbed his fingers together audibly, as though imagining a strand of her hair between them. Something about the gesture filled Naruto with revulsion. But let us get down to business. Shall we surrender yourself to me and you won't be harmed? Into the shocked silence that followed, he smiled, as though this of his request were the only sensible thing for them to do. I'm sure we can learn fascinating things from those eyes of yours. What do you say, Naruto-kun, your life, for all those refugees over there? For a horrifying moment, Mikoto thought he was actually going to do it. Then he got that look in his eye, the one that promised trouble, and she felt the burden lift itself from her shoulders. Nope, no deal. Pity. He raised his head and stared into Naruto's eyes. In that instant, Naruto realized his first impression couldn't have been more wrong. Those narrow eyes featured beady pupils that gave him a wicked glare. Both corners of his mouth curled upward into a grin that could not be described as anything other than devious. A chill ran up his spine. Wrong. There was something fundamentally wrong about this man. He hadn't encountered an oily aura like this since his first fight with Orochimaru all those years ago. I have an army, Sugu sneered, sticking his face up close to Naruto's, still wearing the demonic smirk. What do you have? We have a Naruto. Mikoto snarked. Well, then, Sugu huffed, annoyed. I see it as pointless to treat with you any longer. His eyes lingered heavily on Mikoto and Mei, the facade of civility dripping away as he licked his lips. As for you ladies, I'll be sure to take my time with you once I've disposed of your protectors. Mei snarled. Mikoto made a noise of disgust, and in that moment, all hell broke loose. Sakumo's tanto flashed out like lightning, blindingly white within the mist. At first, Naruto thought the man had done something incredibly stupid and attacked, but no, his tanto had caught the edge of a knife, meant for Naruto himself, parrying it away. Shit, he really was fast. Was this the swift release? Then did it enable the man to move at unbelievable speed, faster than the normal eye could see? Nabayuki turned aside just a little, frowning, his satisfaction turning to anger, then dismayed indignation as he realized he'd failed to assassinate his chosen target. He snarled, filthy commoner, so sorry to disappoint you. Sakumo's smirk deepened behind the mask, but I can't let him die just yet. Several glacial seconds passed. When Sugu moved again, this time, he saw it. Enough. Naruto grabbed his hand without thinking, hissing slightly as a dagger his one meant for Sakuma punched through his fingers, and pulled away from the white fang. He felt his voice turn hoarse with anger, his eyes flashing a dangerous, ominous violet. Leave or we'll be forced to kill you. Kill me, Sugu leered as he snatched his hand away with surprising strength. You can't fight me. Any attack on my person will bring the wrath of the Kiri down on your heads. I'm strangely okay with that. Naruto replied with a sneer of his own. Die, now, fool. Sugu blurred backwards even as the blaquette started forward, an errant kunai leaping into his hand. You don't stand a crunch. A giant, blue, and skeletal hand closed around him before he could make use of his superior speed. When that filthy stare dared to meet his, Naruto didn't flinch. Instead, he looked Sugu square in the eye, Mangekyo spinning a veritable pinwheel boring itself into his vision. The smile put paid to his expression in the words that followed. I'm sorry, what was that about me not standing a chance? The bony hand squeezed as he spoke, cracking the man's ribs. Because from the way I see it, my odds just got a little more equal. Sugu sputtered, his face turning blue as he failed to draw a breath. No, wait, I can help the Awak. His words died as the giant fist squeezed even harder. I don't want your help, you little shit. Yeah, you'll be starting a war. Then this is war. The poor fool, he didn't even have time to beg for his life before Susanoo crushed him to a white pulp, spattering gore in every direction. The man's broken body was still falling when the Kiri forces burst out of their complacency, charging forward and baying for attack. Naruto sighed, biting his lip. Looks like it's a fight after all. Allow me. He hadn't seen Mikoto step up, but he certainly heard the intake and subsequent exhale that foretold her favorite attack. Katen Gakakyu no Jutsu. It was a good fire, in Naruto's opinion a really good one. It was the sort of fire that not even Sasuke would have criticized. Even Madara himself would be impressed. So bright that it dazzled their eyes, the fire exploded a little further back than she had aimed. The vanguard dissolved in a roar and a flash, spars and splinters from the shattered trees lethal as 1,000 arrows loosed by master archers. Men were tossed into the air like toys. Many were already dead before they struck the ground. The enemy formation sagged and swayed in place, made uncertain by this sudden and savage display of pyrotechnic power. More timber ignited despite the humidity, tongues of fire licking up and spreading into a sheet of flame. The entire forest shuddered and shook. Tortured screams came to them over the plain. Refugees whooped and cheered at the sight. Even the shinobi cheered at the impact. Only Naruto watched in silence. Inscrutable, his scores of men perished by the power of chakra. While May managed, blinking as she brushed a few stray embers from her short hairs. "That's where you do it again, Mikita-san," she added, with careful courtesy at the woman's glare. "Aim at the trees this time." "Can't," she gasped out. "I used up a huge chunk of my chakra on that one. I'm still good to fight, but I'll need time to recharge before." All eyes fell on the shards of ice materializing in the air, tiny slivers almost like senbon, really hovering around them, taking form and shape from the thick mist. Al barked a warning, telling them to stand aside. Several heads turned toward him in response and beheld young Yukina, her face taut with concentration. Naruto felt a small upswing of nostalgia watching Haku's mother weave through one-handed signs. She was much more powerful than her child, however, even as he looked on more and more needles formed, until the air resembled something of a pincushion. As the man says, "Then, move away." Yukina breathed out in a wispy gasp, and the ice needles stilled, points directed at the recovering enemy flank. Her hand swayed in an angry, savage gesture and the deadly shards flew forward. Still disorganized by the flames somewhat, most were unprepared for the ensuing shower of icy death. Some, unfortunately, saw the attacks coming and managed to avoid having their vitals pierced. Some, but not all. Naruto estimated that a third of the enemy force had been eliminated by now, not counting the Chaos Chikaku's shadow and Inoichi's mind destruction wrought on the ranks. But the shock of the elemental onslaught had worn off now, and even from here, he could see some producing hand signs, and oh, that was a large one. "Inoichi Shikaku back now," Naruto called out, recognizing the jutsu. "I'm up, Sakumo with me." Inoichi and Shikaku wheeled back towards the group, discarding their cloaks in the same movement as they fell back into the ranks. Sakumo alone chose to retain his hold on the garment, though the foul look in his eye said it was purely to spite the enemy more than anything else. A tanto flashed in his hand, gleaming a grisly white. Oh, so that was how he'd acquired the moniker of the White Fang. The White Fang and the Black Death. Had a nice ring to it, but that was a thought for another time. Now it was time for defense. Naruto stepped forward, hands weaving the signs needed, and, sure enough, the White Fang joined him a heartbeat later. Daden Doryuheki. Rather than simply vomit the mud needed as Sakumo did, Naruto instead slapped both hands down upon the ground and channeled a massive amount of chakra into his palms. The earth itself responded, springing up in buttress of stone and soil, towering high over their heads, bathing them in misty shadows. Naruto leapt up over it, shooting skyward as the earthen rampart carried him up through the mists. And not a moment too soon. No sooner had the earth wall reached its full height than it shuddered, shaking as massive missile of hardened water collided against it. 5 shinobi had worked together to create that massive watery missile, but despite their cooperation, the twin earth walls held on the east and western side. This bird's eye view was precisely what he needed. He could see them down there, foolishly grouped together. And they could see him, timed all but ground to a halt as the Mangekyo Sharingan flared in his eyes. "My turn." Susanoo bristled around him, knocking an arrow on its longbow. Then 2, 3, 4, 5. Naruto took aim with the deadly blue-black specter, sighting down at the quintet of Jonin with intent. The chakra string of its massive twine bristled, stretched taut. He held it for a moment longer, reading the tiny bodies below, predicting the directions in which they would scatter. Then he let the missiles fly. Twang! Like heavenly javelins, 5 arrows flew, straight and true. The first 3 were skewered almost before they realized what was happening, and by the time their comrades realized what was going on, Naruto had wrought havoc on them. He didn't bother to stay and watch as his arrows found the 4th ninja, then the 5th. He let a 6th fly for good measure, scattering the enemy shinobi still further. And that was when he saw the large, very large shape surging forward in the distance. Somehow, he couldn't bring himself to feel any fear at the sight of the sanbai, gaining though it was. Only annoyance. Playtime was over. He needed to wrap this up now. Dropping back to the earth, Naruto let the earth wall crumble and flared the Rinnegan in his eyes. Ignoring the odd whispers, the legendary Dojutsu stained his eyes violet. And he inhaled. Mikoto hissed, recognizing the technique. By the time she had the wherewithal to cover her ears, the reincarnated Uchiha had already let loose a volley of Hellifer. Katen Goka Mekakyu. This blaze made the last one look tame. A veritable wall of molten death exploded from Naruto's mouth, lacking restraint and flowing outward in a massive sea of flame. Some of the enemy tried to deflect him with water walls of their own, but the blaze was a life of its own now, plowing through their feeble defenses to immolate any who stood before it. Another third perished in that cruel conflagration. The flames and mist were just the cover Naruto needed to finish the rest. He had no way of knowing that Tsukiji had a hand in this, dropping hints to the mad Mizukage that Konoha shinobi were in his territory. Of course, Yaguraku's as Iwasa would respond with force, attack any who dared to trespass on his lands. Naruto didn't care. There was no time to care. Scooping up Yoruichi in one arm, he unceremoniously tossed the dark-skinned girl towards Shikaku with an audible grunt. The tiny girl shrieked in surprise before the Nara caught her. By the look on Shikaku's face, you might think he'd just been handed a poisonous snake. What the hell am I supposed to do with her? Keep her safe. May and the precious few ninja he'd recruited closed in around him, not bearing knives to stab him as he'd suspected. Instead, they did something miraculous. They closed ranks, forming a defensive perimeter. It all made sense now. Agura had sent the core of the dissenters here to this village, those who might be swayed to leave Kiri behind in search of a better life. Too many. There are too many of them, and not enough of his allies. Looking closer, he could see soldiers militia amongst them as well, infantrymen armed with pikes, swords, and the like. He was going all in. Bile rose in the back of his throat. It was going to be a massacre. Just like that day. Fire flashed before his vision. Naruto shook his head, but the memory persisted regardless. The smell of sulfur filled his nose. Ash on his skin. The sky burning. No, this wasn't happening. This was the past. He'd been here before. It was the same. Only a few miles east from here, he'd watched Madara slaughter May and the Kurgakure resistance. And it was about to happen again, this time at the hands of Igura. No, he couldn't let this happen. Not again. No. Sakumo must have seen the look in his eye, because he tried to grab him. Instead, his fist closed around empty air. Idiot, don't you dare. Without thinking, he jumped. 1. Launching himself through the air in a wide arc, he began to count down the seconds until he would be able to push again. The air boiled around him like a thing alive, the mist writhing and shifting before the pressure of his sudden ascent and then his descent, violently resisting as he streaked up out of village and towards the forest. He needed to reach the enemy before they hit the villagino. He would. There was no room for any of the doubts that plagued him here. Do or do not. There is no try. 2. Naruto bellowed a challenge in mid-leap, calling all eyes unto him. Enemy shinobi looked up, pointing. Kunai, shuriken, and a few hastily fired water jutsu flew at him in a storm of water and blades. Uchiha burned Susanoo in his right arm and swatted them aside, shattering them as though they were sticks. With his other hand he formed a bow of bone and fire, knocking back an arrow in its arm. One eye squinted shut, sighting down his target. Target's blue fire brimmed at its edges, snapping forward now as he released the string. Earth cratered. Bodies burned, perforated and immolated. Someone screamed. 3. Succumbing to gravity at last, Naruto landed directly in the enemy center, the last embers of Susanoo smoldering softly around him as it faded. There was a quiet moment as the soldiers and shinobi turned in surprise. Naruto crouched amid them, pieces of shattered steel and smoldering flames raining down from the sky. The countdown on his head reached a crescendo as the shock of landing raced through his sandals, the very earth shifting beneath his feet as he took the chakra and molded it within, gathering it, compacting it. 4. Then he pushed. 5. He flared chakra with a yell, standing and thrusting the full might of the Shinra Tensei outward in a dome of pure spite. The burst of godlike power hurled shinobi away by their flak jackets, tossing a dozen men into the air, sending some crashing into trees and their companions, reducing others little more than gory smears on the ground. He had just enough time to shout out an order to his allies. Then, those far back enough to resist the almighty push swarmed him in a sea of elements and blades. Mostly blades. Wow, those were some large shuriken. His hand latched onto the nearest Kiri nin he could find and yanked, hauling the startling man off his feet. A savage headbutt rendered the poor fellow insensate, rendering his back little more than a fleshy mean shield for flying projectiles. He quivered once, cried out, and was still. Naruto didn't bother to wait, tossing the corpse aside into one of his attackers before drawing a knife. The larger Warfin was all but useless at such range and flinging himself into the fray. What followed next was little more than a soaked blur. This close, there was no room for any of his larger, area effect jutsu, and with so many bodies pressing in around him, it was nearly impossible to tell friend from foe. He fought, slashed, and killed as he never had ever done in his life. He fought until he was covered in some his own, some that of the enemy, and kept fighting, breaking necks, snapping bones, always killing, crushing, dismembering, eviscerating. Rational thought ceased to be, replaced only by the blinding urge to protect everyone, to make sure not a single soul left this place alive. The Black Death, Harem, carried him amidst the enemy like a Y-wraith. Whomever he touched became a walking target, a mark for him to use as he pleased. Within the first few seconds he'd branded nearly the entire enemy force on his own, and countless more had fallen to his deadly taijutsu, others, brutal crosscuts from a kunai. In the back of his mind, Naruto began to understand just how Madara had laid waste to most of the allied army by himself so long ago. It was the Sharingan. Even here in the thick murk of the mist, everything seemed to move in slow motion. With these eyes, he could see everyone, everything. Their moves were painfully obvious, telegraphed to him by these unholy orbs. Coupled with Harem, well, it gave him a sizable handicap. So this was how his dad had become so deadly, so infamous. Harem wasn't just a teleportation jutsu, it was a damned army killer. And he took full advantage. The kunai shot past with an explosive tag attached, momentarily breaking the iron chain of his thoughts. Scoffing, he caught the note and peeled it away even as the knife flew harmlessly by, then slapped it onto a nearby shinobi before kicking him, shrieking, into his fellows. The ensuing blast of fire and flame that followed after was particularly satisfying. One shinobi managed to fire off a water bullet. Naruto simply flared the Rinnegan's power and absorbed the ninjutsu, adding to his well of chakra, strengthening him, revitalizing him more than ever before. Despite his best efforts to the contrary, Naruto felt himself sneering at the man's hopeless expression. He raised a hand, fingers splayed. Kami, this was almost unfair. For him, sorry, he whispered, a knife of real guilt stabbing at his as he saw the terror of their own death in each of their eyes. I wish it didn't have to be this way. In the next instant, a wall of solid, invisible force roared forward to meet the enemy shinobi, flattening him and his fellows to the ground. Then another and another and another, until there was nothing left on the forlorn field but broken bodies and white paste. No one rose to fight him, all was silent, save the ever-closing clamor of the sandbai in the distance. Naruto lowered his palm and listened, feeling wretched in the silence. He really was a murderer, now. It was almost anticlimactic. He'd killed them all. A small globule of lava whizzed overhead, snapping him out of his self-imposed sorrows. The would-be assassin closing at his flank shrieked in agony, clawing furiously at himself as the jutsu caught him full in the butt to no avail, burning through Kevlar and flesh. In short order, he was gone. Naruto risked a glance over his shoulder, smiling in relief. They shot him a saucy wink and then she was gone, stalking towards one of the bodies, still twitching on the ground. Naruto realized what he was doing and called out for her to spare him. Leave that one alive, he snapped, pointing. I want answers. The rage was fading now, replaced by an icy calm. Yukina and Ao were doing their level best to settle the startled refugees. Somewhere behind him, little Yoruichi was crying. The steadfast Shikaku stood near her, his strangling shadow slowly slipping from the corpse of the man who'd tried to do her harm. Sekumo stood over a prone Yukitaka, who, it seemed, had tried to make trouble after all. Inoichi looked as though he'd seen the Reaper itself, and Makoto was furiously kicking Sugu's corpse, not caring for the on her sandals. A wide cut on her cheek told him she'd seen fighting as well. Bastard prick, as she shouted, the rest of her rant. Nearly unintelligible. Not so smug now, or, you not so tough now, huh? Naruto heard and saw it all, and with steel in his heart, he stalked toward the lone survivor, gripped him by the collar, and in his most calm, implacable voice, snarled. You are going to tell me who informed you of our presence here. How much pain you endure beforehand, that is up to you, he said emotionlessly. No, then we'll be doing this the hard way, Titebeo. When the man refused to answer, he flared his Sharingan and forced the truth out of him. A mere minute in the hell of Tsukiyomi had the poor prisoner singing like a songbird. It was Tsuchikage, he bleated, choking on his. He sent our lord a letter, that was how we knew you'd be here. Please don't kill me, we didn't know. Anoki, lovely, which means we have spies in our villages. Why is it always spies, he snarked, annoyed. Sneaky, dirty, backstabbing eye. No, we're all shinobi here, but it just sounds civilized. When the baffled man refused to answer him, Naruto mercifully cut his throat, sparing him the slow agony of suffocating to death with all that fluid in his lungs. Turning back to them, he opened his mouth to speak. He didn't have long to wait. No sooner had he settled his stance than the sandbai came crashing through the forest. Naruto nearly balked at the sheer size of it, remembering the creature he'd faced down all those years ago. It was not an experience he cared to revisit, but he would, if he must. Like a giant warrior straight out of ancient times, the perfect Susanoo rose around him, a silent sentinel of Bushido, its wings flaring wide. Blue and black chakra flickered around him as he conjured up a blade in hand, a sword capable of slicing mountains in twine. He stepped forward, ready to meet the beast blow for blow. And then everything went pear-shaped. Attacking a Biju head-on was reckless. Uzumaki Naruto had done many such things in his life, even before his rebirth, as it were. He'd challenged the odds time and time again, always coming out on top no matter what fate threw at him. But this, taking on a giant turtle with nothing more than his eyes and Susanoo to protect him, thighs, went beyond reckless. Even further beyond. It was stupid and foolish and just damn arrogant. But with dozens of people and shinobi at his back, he didn't have a choice. In another life, what felt like nearly an age ago now, he'd once witnessed Madara laying waste to nearly all 9 Biju with a blink of the eye. But limbo wasn't something he'd mastered just yet, nor was it a technique was eager to use with a village of people at his back. His first instinct was to use his newfound wings to take flight, but he couldn't do that either, not without seriously risking the lives of his comrades. So, with that singular thought in mind, he dug Susanoo's feet in, spread his arms, and braced himself for the charging tortoise. Victory isn't always certain. Sometimes we trip, sometimes we stumble, sometimes we fall, sometimes the best of us burn. In this case, it was a Baijudama, the sudden swirl of energy exploding into life a mere moment before Aisabu collided with him. Behind the armored helm of Susanoo, Naruto blanched, crossing both arms before his face, a heartbeat too late. The detonation roared over him split second later. Oh, crap. Naruto didn't bother exclaiming his intentions, he simply flared the Rinnegan and pushed with all his might. For a moment, just a moment, he met resistance, but it held. Wait, where was the turtle? That was all he had time for before said creature burst out of the soil. From behind, Susanoo poured on a burst of speed, tucked inward and rolled, driving him headlong into the burgeoned explosion. Yup, he'd forgotten it could do that. Its armored shell ground against Susanuo's chakra-enhanced bone like one giant grater, chipping pieces away until he was physically forced to drop the giant body for a moment, allowing the blast to all but shoot by harmlessly below. By the time he'd reconstituted it, the turtle was already there, tackling him into the forest. Thum, ground and soil, entire acres of trees pushed against the giant's feet as he shoved the enraged demon away. Okay, oh. I'd forgotten what it was like to actually be pushed in this body. He glanced down, just now noticing me on his hands, as CD bare in reflection of his own injury. A grim parody of a once pleasant smile stretched across his face as he focused his attention on the titan before him, pearly white teeth flashing on the mist. You know, for the first time I think I'm actually starting to enjoy myself. Yup, sometimes we fall down, and sometimes we get back up, dust ourselves off, and keep moving. Fugaku, the one Uchiha, meekly raised his head in the darkness as his master called to him, Tringan failing utmost to keep his scars hidden in the black. He knew he shouldn't be ashamed of the marks that had claimed most of his face. On the contrary, his master insisted that he should be proud. He was a true Uchiha, a survivor, the only one worthy to be mentored by his great ancestor. But how could he be proud when he was forced to live like this here in this underground lair, cut off from the world? How was he to fulfill his destiny? A subtle pulse of chakra reminded him that his master still required his attention. You called, master. Humbly he approached the wooden throne, debasing himself before him. A wet cough answered. The impostor is fighting the Sambai even as we speak. You must make certain that he does not. Suddenly that withered figure at his head, considering. No, it's too late. He already has it. In that case, I am sending you to Iwai. I believe you know what to. After which, your destination is Konoha. You may do whatever you wish there, settle old grudges, I do not care. But you must bring me the Kyuibai Jinchuriki. You cannot fail me in this, Fugaku. My time is running short. Fugaku barely heard him. His mind had seized upon a single fact, locked on the knowledge that he was free to do as he pleased. Two can burn it to the ground the entire village. Yes, my boy. By contrast, the man's smile was almost fatherly. You can burn it all. Fugaku nearly cackled with glee. Then I will have my revenge on that brat Naruto. Yes. No, that took the crippled Uchiha back. No, Madara-sama. No, the shriveled Uchiha replied, resting his chin upon a bony hand. I will be the one to kill him. Ever since he'd merged with this black Zetsu creature he'd become infinitely stronger, true, but no matter how much he might wish otherwise his scars always remained. Not just on his body but in his mind, his psyche still savaged by the deadly flames that had nearly claimed his life. It was those eyes, those awful, horrible eyes that gazed upon him and found him wanting, consigning him to defame and defilement. His clan had been there, and they had abandoned him. Mikoto had abandoned him. All because of him, that man, traitor, impostor. But no, it is time. Aisabu was angry. He did not understand why it was losing, or how for that matter, only that it was. And that made it angrier still. Its mind was a jumbled mess from years of genjutsu and pain and suffering, all jagged and sharp edges, in no mood to heed its opponent's mental cry that it had to stop, that it knew him, if only it would listen. But it was not listening. Its mind was broken and shackled by his master, branded with but a single order, a lone command that it couldn't defy even if it wanted to. Kill. And Naruto, for all his powers, was having a very difficult time bringing himself to do that. Oh, you son of a, stop running around and hold still. Naruto choked in surprise as his blade met empty air, forcing him to spin and assume a ready stance once more. 3 water bullets followed, contemptuously cut down by the blazing azure blade in his grasp, but when he tried to strike out and cut down their own, Aisabu proved to be deceptively fast. Watching it all, Mikoto's sweat dropped. It's like they're playing a giant game of whack-a-mole. She winced slightly, laying a hand against her deceptively flat stomach, hissing softly at it. Why, you little stop that, don't come out now. By the time she'd raised her gaze, most of the Konoha shinobi and even a few Kiri were giving her looks of varying disbelief. What she gulped, a pang of almost comical dread overtaking her. It isn't anything. That was my quiet voice. You had no right to listen. Mikoto, Sakuma began slowly. How far along did you say you were again? A few weeks, she lied. Without the genjutsu. I have no idea what you're talking about. You haven't let anyone see you since we left the village. Shikaku pointed out. The heiress was growing progressively redder by the moment, her face burning brightly beneath the dark halo of her hair. May blinked. Now that I look, it's obvious. You're not the best at genjutsu at the moment, are you not, with a bun in the oven at any rate? I wonder if he's a one-woman kind of man. Mikoto's flush had now reached uninvented, nuclear levels. Al bucked. Lady May, are you serious? What if he kills Higura? I'd be more than happy to open relations with the Leaf. Mikoto wanted to die. She wanted a meteor to fall from heaven and strike her down now and send her to the afterlife, cause anything was better than having her dirty laundry aired here before complete strangers. May's not so simple comment certainly didn't help matters any, either. Kill me now, God. Shikaku and Inoichi deadpanned. Nope. Look, it's not my fault if the little Gabuger wants to come early. I thought this would be an easy mission, open and shut one last hurrah before I pop out a kid and get regulated to diaper duty. Not that she had an offense to bearing a child or anything, she simply hadn't expected the mission to take this long. What with the traveling and concealing her pregnancy from prying eyes through subtle, then increasingly blatant misuse of genjutsu. A collective sigh arose from the men. Then you'd better pray your fiancé wins. Growling, Naruto advanced on the sandby again, readying himself just as the turtle threw itself into another dizzying spin. This time it seemed he was ready for its unstoppable assault. A harsh shout echoed out from the giant. Amaterasu. For the first time since the brawl had begun, the beast shrieked in pain. Its charge fell short as the black flames erupted against its eye, tearing into its cornea like a rusty knife. The massive beast went careening past a lot of them with only a few feet to spare, showering them in dirt as it spun and tried to roll again, seeking its target. It never made it. All right, here goes nothing. He sidestepped the assault and swung as quickly as he dared, bowling the giant turtle over with one swipe of his blade and sending it skidding back through a mountain, crushing the edifice under its massive bulk. However, it quickly righted itself and clambered back to its feet as it were, unharmed. Huh, tough little bastard, that's it. In a Harito unseen move, he banished the ethereal blade and spread his arms wide, Susanuo's wingspan flaring behind him. Sekumo balked. Is he? Mikoto grinned. I think so. Come at me, bro. Shikaku's sweat dropped as Naruto's resonating shout snarled down at them. Yup, that sounds like him. Mei sighed. So manly. Oi, 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 oi. Aisabu did just as the Uchiha demanded, cannoning into the giant with the force of a small typhoon. Naruto held his ground and the giant with him, giant hands closing around the massive abomination and grinding away. Slowing. Almost an unseen thing at first, barely perceptible, but their sparks. Aisabu kept spinning but slowly, its momentum grinding to a painful halt until it stopped altogether. Realizing its mistake, the three-tailed turtle began to try every trick its addled mind knew of to escape, desperately seeking the safety of the water. It writhed and thrashed, bucked and brayed, determined to be free, but Naruto refused to let go. A thundering snarl rose from Susanoo. Damn it, Aisabu, I know you're stronger than me, you damn thing, but I can't will not los orah. With a final, monumental howl, he gripped the creature's soft underbelly and heaved with all his might, hurling it away. It was a very good throw, everyone thought. Freed from the earth, the Biju went sailing up, Upen, then down, down, down. The giant hand placed itself in front of the town as the shrieking monstrosity crashed down into the water, the massive limb blocking it from the ensuing tidal wave. All around them the land splintered and tore, but the little fishing village remained, thanks to the impenetrable blue bulwark thrust before them. When at last the smoke and thunder had died, the giant simply picked itself back up and lumbered towards its prey. Aisabu offered a meek whine from where it lay on its back, lacking the means or the will to right itself. Well, that was anticlimactic. Naruto staggered upright, balanced the giant's weight on his right foot, and cut down. I'll take it from here. To his surprise, the creature flowed right up his blade, physically drained away as though it had never existed. It flowed right up the arm, and to the Uchiha's disbelief, into him. His stomach. He felt his chakra coil strain just a bit, twitching, as they swelled to accommodate their new tenant. Higura's body was left behind, emptied of its Biju, still and dead as the shattered landscape behind it. Naruto felt a passing twinge of regret for the life he'd unintentionally taken, then came the confusion. This didn't make any sense. None. Okay, what? He supposed he still had a Ghost of the Reaper death seal placed upon him, but he hadn't been trying to draw anything into it. More than that, it was empty. He'd run out of the last vestiges of Kurama's chakra a long time ago, nearly a month now. He hadn't been the one to pull the sandby inside of him. Something Somiono's had. Well, that narrowed the culprits to two. Don't look at me, partner Yami, Naruto cried as Naruto turned his attention on him. Blame the who? My thanks for the meal. Sure enough, the woman's voice purred back at him, leaving him with the distinct sensation of someone smacking their lips after a well-finished meal. That washmum. Delicious. Well done, that. Only 8? No. 7, I suppose. Given how much of the fox's chakra I took, more to go. I suppose returning in a diminished capacity is better than none at all. Keep up the good work. There was a silence as Naruto's brain processed. What? How did you do? Oh, many things, she replied flippantly, and in a sudden moment of clarity he saw white hair in his mind's eye. I modified your seal, cleared away a bit of clutter, used it to take in the essence of the sandby and make it my own. Now, I need not fear wasting away while you work. It has made you several times more powerful as well. You may thank me, if you wish. Naruto felt his eye twitch. He wasn't feeling very thankful at the moment. Within good reason, all right, enough's enough. Who are you? I'm terribly sorry, dear, but I'm afraid I don't feel like telling you that just yet. You might react poorly. Just like that, the pressure abated, leaving him to wonder at its source. Oh, don't pout. I suppose I'll leave you with a hint. I am a ghost, someone who once was, and still may yet be once again. Great. Now, his deadpan was barely concealed. So I have a ghost of some dead lady in my head. Suo comforting. And are you so different? White eyes stared back at him from the abyss, a pair of full lips quirking in a smile, oddly familiar. You, who have come back from death itself and become more than what you ever were, an Uchiha now in body and yes, but still in Uzumaki and in the soul. Do you not realize how close you are to me? 7 steps will make you a god. The world will be yours to do with as you see fit. If you do not want war, then there will be no war, none of this meaningless trivial illusions that Madara wanted. Peace, genuine, actual, peace. And if I don't want to be a god, he replied. He knew firsthand the kind of corruption power like that could bring. She huffed, put out by his reluctance. You have no say in the matter. That is to be. You're awfully pushy. Anybody ever telling you that? Yes, but worry not. Suffice it to say we share a common goal. I only desire to see you succeed in that very goal, which is mine as well. And who knows, you just might find yourself in the favor of a goddess by the end. Goodbye for now, mate of mine. We shall speak again. It was impossible to tell, but in that instant, he could have sworn he felt lips brush his ear. Then she was gone, her presence slipping through his hands even as he tried to pin her down. He was really beginning to wonder who she was. But there were other matters to attend to. Banishing Susanoo, he dropped down into the water, effortlessly alighting upon its surface. Igura stared back at him, laying adrift in the deep. Once more, Naruto felt his heart lurch. He'd only met Igura briefly, but it still hurt knowing he'd essentially killed a fellow Jinchuriki. Just a reminder that Uzumaki Naruto still existed inside him, not the Uchiha everyone thought he was. What he was about to do made that heart turn to ice and shatter, but he knew it had to be done. Long time no see, he said, dropping his haunches. No offense, but you look like shit. Yaoi, sorry. Naruto felt just a prickling of pity as he reached down for the dying Mizukichi. I didn't mean to kill you. It just happened. I know you think I'm heartless, but this is the only way to figure out who did this to you. To find out who keeps pulling the strings. Rest in peace, old friend. Before the half-dead Igura had a chance to wonder what he meant by that, the Uchiha placed a hand to his head and pulled. Rinnegan flaring, he reached down deeper than most men dared, found the furring essence that was once Higura's soul, and pulled. Ah yes, his mind was quite forthcoming. What? There must have been a mental block of some sort in his mind, because he instantly found his attention sucked inwards into a place that was neither here nor there. In a dark cave, in the black of night, he stared at his age-old enemy. I knew it was you, Naruto. The old man's voice was like an amplified whisper. If a knife could talk, this would be what it sounded like. He pointed one long, bony finger at him, chuckling dry. I had my suspicions, but this irony truly does hate the two of us, doesn't it? I cast back into this withered shell, and you, wielding all my strength, all my powers. He wasn't surprised. Not really. It stood to reason that Madara, of all people, would find some way to claw his way back from the Reaper's stomach. Assuming that was the case, care to tell me how you're here? Death is a two-way street for beings like us, boy, came the mysterious reply. He paused, considering. Then he nodded. You make a fine Uchiha. I can see the death in your eyes. It stains your very soul. Tell me, how many have you killed using my gifts? Does it make you feel proud? The blonde bristled at the accusation, revulsion warring with spite. I am not an Uchiha. These abilities are a means to an end. Nothing more. The withered warrior leaned back with a creak of bone. Perhaps not yet, but you will be, in time. It makes you dangerous. That's why you have to die. Save me the speech. A gloved hand shot up, waving through the watery image. What do you want? Want that actually got a blink from the one-eyed codger. I want what I've always wanted. A world where there are no losers, where there is no wa. Please tell me you're not going to start the Moon's Eye plan again. When the latter refused to answer, Naruto nearly laughed. Oh, my God. You're pathetic. You're still living in a fantasy world, ignoring reality. Says the fool parading around as an Uchiha, came the thundering reply. I didn't ask for it. That's the difference. Yet you don't hesitate to make use of it, Madara sneered. Admit it, Naruto, you enjoy it. He shambled down off the wooden throne with a dark chuckle and hobbled towards him, looking him square in the eye. All the power, the prestige, the entire village down on bended knee. In your boots, it's what you always wanted. Everyone has an eye out for you now. Everyone either wants you to be their shining knight or their darkest fear. And you love it. All this attention, the adulation you never had. Lies. Naruto didn't let it show, didn't reveal just how closely those words had struck to home. Exhaling, he spun away, pushing past the block and probing deeper into Yagura's subconscious. I don't need to justify myself to you. Heavens no, of course you don't. I don't care if she has chosen you, Uzumaki. You will fail, and I will succeed. This time, there will be no death god to save you. Ignoring the inane urge to ask just who she was, the former blonde glared red daggers at the ancestral Uchiha, refusing to back down. I could say the same. This time you won't succeed. You poor fool. You don't even know. Do you will die last for that, imposter? And with that, the vision was gone. Naruto jerked back to himself, scowling. Igura knew nothing. Less than nothing. Even pulling out his soul seemed to have distanced him even further from his goal. Yes, he knew that Madara was back, and yes, he knew that the man was still gunning for him, and yes, he was being a gigantic prick about it, but that did nothing to tell him where he was, what he was doing, or what he was up to. Knowing the final outcome was only good as long as you knew how to stop it at all. Hey Madara, why can't you just stay dead? Madara. Naruto spun around so fast he was almost certain he'd given himself whiplash. Sakumo Haddock stared back at him, his expression questioning. How much of that had he heard? None of it was particularly damning, but it could still bring up all sorts of unwanted questions, and he didn't want to go around poking that particular hornet's nest just yet. You might want to get back to the village. The whitehead jerked a thumb over his shoulder. Mikoto's going into labor. Wait, what? Faster than a speeding kunai, and ignoring the snickers of his two occupants, Naruto bolted back towards the village. The small tent had been erected on the outskirts in his absence, near which he could see a number of Kiri shinobi gathered. He sped inside, somewhat alarmed to find Mikoto within, Shikaku and Inoichi, as well as a very baffled Yoruichi, the young girl standing guard over her prone, gasping form. And May. Oh, the green-eyed vixen blinked. The conquering hero returns, just in time. Naruto brushed past her, hurrying to the Blackette's side. Yoruichi had her head aside. Daddy. Oh, that was a can of worms he did not want to open right now. What in blazes is going on? The heiress stuck out her tongue, grimacing. Yeah, remember that bit about being pregnant? Distantly, he felt the beginnings of a frown pulling at his lips. Yes, I might have used henge and a bit of genjutsu to make it seem like I wasn't that far along. And she grimaced as another contraction hit. Do I need to spell it out for you? Somewhere in the back of his brain, wires crossed. Oh, all kinds of duck. Language. Sorry, dear. And as for you, she poked Naruto in the, reaching up to grab him by the collar of his flak jacket. You put this thing inside of me or going to be here when I deliver it. Sakumo had never seen Naruto so flustered before in all his life. Well, never heard really, seeing as Naruto had yet to leave the tent. Mikoto's crease and his yelps of pain, however, rang quite clearly through the gathered ensemble of guards and allies. Truth be told, it was the first time he'd heard the annoyingly little bugger be anything other than smug. Truth be told, he rather enjoyed it. Immensely. Arg, hate you so much right now. Sangamaru, clan head of the Kaguya, arched a bright eye, his white brow nearly brushing the twin red dots in his forehead. That is the wife of the Black Death, is it not? She certainly seems to have a loud voice, if nothing else. Tell Bonehead to shut it or I will end him. And possibly the man wasn't offended by the heiress's angry shout. If anything, he seemed excited by her vitriol. I like her, she has spurred. I pray her husband is as strong as the rumors claim. Haddock managed to feign a look of summary nervousness at that. Yes, well, you'll see soon enough. Now, as you were saying, Kagaya Dono. Ah, yes, I was saying something, wasn't I? We would be honored to fight beside someone so mighty as the Black Death. His head bobbed sagely, the white curtain of his tresses jerking sharply from the motion. I have only one desire beforehand, to witness his strength for myself. Oh, that'll be no problem. He led the eager man, more of a battle freak, really aside from the speculative Kiri shinobi. Here, why don't we formalize it in writing? Bah, I always hated paperwork. Negotiations with the Kaguya were well underway, the clan having been drawn by the conflict against the Sanbai to what the leader was even now calling a battle for the ages. But alas, Naruto was not there to conduct or formalize the treaty. No, he was busy tending to other matters. Push. I'm pushing you, insufferable bastard. I blame you for this. You put this thing in me. Come on, Mikitachin, don't be like Thoto. WOWOWOW, that's my hand. Oh, I'm so sorry, that hurts. I'm fine, came the strangled cry. I'm not going anywhere. All right, an equally pained whimper followed as a head of black hair peered out of the tent. Don't squeeze. I'd rather not have an arm in a cast. Push. With a final, agonizing scream, Mikoto did. May cried out seconds later. It's a boy. Sakumo gulped at the silence that followed. He could only imagine what was taking place in the tent right now. A dad. I'm a dad. Well, this feels weird. Don't faint, dear. Mikoto crooned. I'm trying. Naruto stared down at the tiny pink face, gawping slightly. The child stared back up at him with wide, dark eyes. The Uchiha valiantly fought off tears, but to no avail. They poured from him like a leaky dam as he bid hello to the small life he'd unwittingly helped bring back into this world. He gazed down at the small face, that little body swaddled in white cloth. His heart lurched. The kid had been born early. In fact, he looked perfectly healthy. Mikoto beamed, her sweaty face looking like sunshine to his eyes. Welcome to the world, she cooed, nestling the small bundle in her arms. Even if you decided to come a little early, Naruto fed a thought at one of his clones, setting the doppelganger to tending her delicate, exhausted body. Inoichi and Shikaku had fainted dead away, evidently unaccustomed to witnessing the birth of a child, and Naruto silently resolved to remind them of their lack of fortitude at every turn. Wait, the baby, why wasn't he crying? They leaned over him. Just a moment, he has just a little fluid in his lungs. Are there Well, Naruto jumped, startled by the vehemence of the boy's cry. Whoa, he's a loud one, Mikoto murmured, just like his father. Wow, Yoruichi peeked over the bed, her golden eyes shining. He sold me. Does that make me a big sister? Mikoto shot Naruto a dangerous look, a look that said you will be explaining this later, before returning her attention to the caramel-skinned girl. Well, since it seems my husband does have a habit of picking up strays and little sisters during his traverso, I suppose it does. You wound me, Naruto found himself sputtering. It's not my fault, I have a soft spot for kids. A very soft spot, came the pouting reply. Libel, have you thought of a name? May asked, restraining a smile. Just like that, Mikoto perked up, the baby's cries having quieted while she rocked him gently to and fro. As a matter of fact, yes. Naruto felt his ears prick, standing at attention. Oh, you never mentioned that before. What'll it be? Then please tell me we're not naming him Sasuke. That got him a strange look. Actually, I was thinking Itachi. Itachi? Huh, I like that name. You better. She huffed. It's your turn to hold him. Why no, I'll drop him, there's no way, Io. His protest died away as Mikoto offered him his son. Pulling the small infant into his arms, he dared a smile, his first true smile since coming to this time period. The infant in his arms burbled happily. It seemed impossible, but he thought he saw a gleam of recognition in those small, dark eyes. And just like that, he was lost. Ship sunk, floundering on the shore. Any fears he might have had of being a father all but withered away, replaced by honestly he wasn't sure what. It didn't seem possible to love someone at first sight, but this boy, his son, God's, my son. Hey, Itachi. It was, he decided, the greatest moment of his life. And it would also be one of the last. All around them, Konoha burned a candle in the night. Naruto spun away from the masked man, biting back a low growl as yet another bruise formed on his arm. Fast, solid, too. Even blows from the incomplete Susanoo seemed to bounce off of him, almost as if he were physically thick-dense somehow in this reality. Grabbing him was near impossible. It was the complete antithesis of Obaido's power, and that worried him. He'd worked so hard to make certain that Obaido never became the masked man, but it seemed fate had other designs for him if this stranger was any indication. He didn't understand it at all. They'd come back to find the village in flames, but instead of an army attacking, it was just one man. One man who, apparently, commanded the Yonbai. They'd come home to find the beast rampaging within their very wells, and though it had been easily beaten back thanks in part to the Sambawaiter and lava not mixing well and whatnot, the true threat still remained an irritant. And he was tearing through their forces, through him, as though they were ranked genin that. That was troubling. Who the hell are you? Naruto growled, ducking an unwieldy thrown tree branch. What do you want? Don't remember us, do you? The masked stranger merely laughed, his lone eye twinkling out from a hole the black mask opposite the one Obaido should have worn. How you humiliated us, demeaned us, shamed us. Well, now we plan to do the same to you. That's right. A scarred hand thrust forward, pointing at him imperiously. We know who you are, boy. We know, and we will have you pay for what you did to us. Ice ran up Naruto's spine to the base of his skull. That voice, you're insane, he countered. They circled one another, two predators, waiting for the right moment to strike. And you're an imposter, the masked man said. A fake, fraud. How does it feel, Black Death, to know that, after coming so far, you are about to lose everything you once held dear? Naruto reached behind his back, his hand already forming the seals that would punch a hole through the madman. I won't lose anything if I kill you. But can you, I wonder? Before he could blast him to pieces, the man pulled something out of his voluminous robe. Scarlet hair flashed in the moonlight. A chain rattled. No, not something, he realized. Someone. Naruto froze. A soft voice reached his ears. Her voice, Narutoran. In that instant, running was the last thing on his mind. Kushina, put her down. Oh, no, no, no. The madman tittered softly, wagging a finger. You're not the one giving us orders. Not anymore. Growling, the masked Uchi had jerked his victim back on the chain, drawing her closer to him, shackled as she was to his arm. The woman snarled virulently and kicked at him, only to yelp in pain as he backhanded her, cackling madly. Ah, feisty, the things we could do to you, but first, your BGMI. Her head snapped backwards, producing a thin crack in his mask. Naruto arched an eyebrow. A vulnerability. He could be caught off guard. So foolish, he crooned, stroking her face. So full of fire. We will enjoy breaking you. Go yourself, traitor, she snapped back. Traitor, that lone eye blinked, indignant. You're wrong, my dear. Another jab at Naruto. He is the traitor. Bullshit. She is important. To you? No, he sneered, roving eye sweeping back to Naruto. Yes, we can see it in your face. Perhaps we should make you feel what we felt when we lost everything that day, yes. A knife appeared in his hand, its naked edge pressing gently against the pale flesh of her jugular. She went still. Maybe you should lose her, and then you will know pain. Then, perhaps, you will understand. Naruto jerked half a step forward, a muscle jumping in his jaw. If you touch her, I'll tear you apart. If he could just cut the chain. We do not fear death. The masked man answered quickly, moving so that his victim was between him and the reborn Uchiha. But you wouldn't hurt her. We know this. You're soft, weak, but if you do not care if she dies, we will remove her. Quickly, he began to move the knife. Fugaku, the name tore from his throat in a snarl, evoking the man's name. Do it, see what happens. Do not call us that. The masked man shrank back, pulling his hostage with him. That is not our name anymore. We are pain, we are more, we are greater, we are better than you. If you believe that, drop her and face me like a man. Never venom colored the man's tone. We will not be fooled by your tricks, not this time. There was a silence. We are, all of us, the sum of our parts, Naruto said at last, his shoulders slumping. Only a coward hides behind a hostage. Fugaku jerked the knife, eliciting a gasp from his victim. Naruto flinched, lowering his head to glower at his feet. The kunai clattered out of his grasp with a resounding clang. All right, when he raised his gaze, there was resignation in his stare. Put her down. I'll do what you want. The crazed Uchiha grinned behind the mask, his grip slackening, just a bit. Yes, we knew you would see it our way. Sorry. Eli, his head jerked down, boring into Kushina's furious gaze, forcing her to look at him. Come, Kyuubi. Kushina spasmed. No. Ha, now you will know. He never got to finish that sentence because the world imploded. Rinbo Hengoku. The next thing Fugaku knew, he was flying back, his head now adorned by something better described as a dent than a face. The next thing he knew, he was knocked upwards. A blinking blue light was growing larger at the end of his vision. The next, he was knocked back down. And the next thing Fugaku, traitor to Konoha, knew, for quite some time after that, was pain. When he finally recovered, when he finally realized where he'd been flung, when his broken mind finally scrabbled together enough sense to see what was happening, he found himself staring into the unholy eyes of the Rinnegan. He'd been flung clear out of the village, he realized, his body impaled upon a series of pointed tree roots far beyond the outskirts of the savage Konoha. Then, to his dismay, those roots bent, trapping him to the ground, beating him. Mokuten Wanhedi. Talk about irony. Naruto alighted only a few feet away, looking like death. There was nothing in those eyes. Like death they swept over him, finding him wanting. You. His voice was like ice, jagged and cruel, cutting him to ribbons with words alone. You die slowly. W. What are you doing? Through his bleary eye he could see the impostor biting his thumb, making hand signs, even as he dragged himself off the roots, staggering upright. He was preparing something, some massive jutsu that drained his reserves by half. But to what purpose? He had to know his body was immune to such. You've done it now, he rumbled. I never wanted to bring this out. I never wanted people to see this side of me. Wham! A boot shot out, catapulting him into the forest. It's like I live in a world of cardboard. Always taking constant or not to breaking something here in the past, to break someone. You will break Io. Snarling, Fugaku surged upright. Naruto blurred, and he found himself down again, the earth cratering beneath his back. Shattered spine. Broken pelvis. The wounds healed almost instantaneously, but even then, there was no respite to be found in the onslaught. Thum! The earth cried out as the reborn Uchiha's fist summoned Susanoo and obliterated half the forest in a single swing, sending the severed halves of Fugaku, Tobai sprawling. Naruto stomped after him without so much as a care in the world, a lone racing shuriken circling in his hand. With F of his fingers, he let it fly, lobbing it at the already reforming hybrid. Shing! Fugaku shrieked as he found himself torn into 1,000 pieces and forcibly reconstituted, broken, reformed, and broken again. Chains of chakra shot up from the earth, tethering him in place, shackling him against what new horrors the blonde had prepared for him. Well, you can take it, can't you, big man? His voice was a sneer, crackling like a whip. What we have here is a rare opportunity for me to vent, to cut loose and show you exactly what I can do. The atrocities I can commit, the beings I can summon, like thys, Kuchios no Jutsu. A great, towering shape rose up out of the ensuing plume of smoke, its great black bulk rearing back. Streaks of jagged blue adjourned his massive bulk, seeming to writhe and shift as he looked on. Slavering jaws gave way, parting to explosive massive teeth as large as he was tall. A throaty rumble gusted from its throat, blasting away the smoke with a single snort. What was this creature? Only devil demon Akuma. He tried to find some word to classify the phantom being of death hovering over him, its wings blotting out the very stars themselves, and found nothing. Eerie golden eyes regarded him and found him wanting. Hello, little man. Naruto raised a finger and uttered 2 words. Acknowledge or destroy. In the hell that followed those 2 words, Fugaku realized something. He knew pain. But this dragon was pain, tossing him about like a rag doll, teeth piercing him, breath puncturing his formerly impenetrable hide as if it were made of wet driftwood. He was torn and mangled and torn again, ripped apart by the Lord of all Dragons until, what felt like an eternity later, the creature was finally satisfied. Then, and only then, did he experience death. A trembling hand closed around his face, lifting him up, shattering the mask like glass. Odd. Something was pulling at him now. No, Wade was looking at his body from the outside, which meant what did that mean anyway? Are you satisfied now, bastard? Distantly he heard the imposter's voice, broken and angry. You sick, mothering piece of shit. Are you happy she's dead? You killed her. Fugaku chuckled wearily, savoring the look of anguish in his opponent's eyes. Good. Now it was done. Now he would know. Now he would experience the soul-wrenching agony of losing something so magneto fate. Then you no pain. An unholy roar answered him. Your soul is mine. What felt like an eternity later, the village finally some semblance of order. The morning sun peeked its head out amidst the carnage, peering down into a village that was beaten, but not broken. One man felt as if he were. Uchiha Naruto stood in the wreckage, fingers holding Kushina's wrist, straining in vain to catch her fluttering pulse, the screams and wailing drifting up to him from the street, the pops of sparking wires from the telephone poles. He heard it all, tried to breathe, and yet, he couldn't. It was the sound of what happened when you thought you knew better than the people who wrote the rulebooks. It was the sound of consequences, and someone had paid the price. Unbidden, the words came back to him. You could be a god. I don't want to be a god. He growled, forming the signs, I want her back. Hands outstretched towards her, fingers clenched. Rin Tensei no. Before he could even finish channeling the chakra, before the jutsu could even be enacted, she stirred. Naruto froze. No, that was impossible. He'd put Kurama back, but the strain had killed her. She'd been dead, so it had to be impossible. There was just no feasible way that she should be here without a sacrifice of some sort on his part, without. You're welcome. The woman's voice fluttered in his ear, a butterfly, taking flight. I just spared you losing half your lifespan. Bright eyes fluttered open. Hey, Kushina groaned in his arms. What did I miss, Titabe? Naruto coughed quietly, fighting back a sob. Oh, nothing, Titabeo. I love it when you say that. Just don't talk for a minute. He rushed down and embraced her, fearing she might evaporate if he let go. Kushina cried. What happened? What did I miss? Did I die? What them? She badgered him with questions, but he didn't have the strength to try and answer any of them. He simply kissed her, and she melted against him like lava, brushing his tears away. She was back. She was alive. And that was all that mattered. They stayed like that for a very long time. Kill, murder, destroy, defenestrate. Naruto, Mikoto sighed patiently as she nursed a hungry attache at her. That last one wasn't a word, you know. It took everything she had and more to restrain a grim smile as Naruto bustled past her, muttering crossly aloud as if he had only one focus in the world, wreaking havoc on those who had struck at the village. His reply certainly lent credit to that. Then I'll make it one. Wait, can he do that? May asked, looking up from the paperwork she was filing, green eyes flecked with concern. Initially she'd been more than a little wary of staying with this disorganized band of rogues until proper housing arrangements were contrived. But thus far, she had to admit, it didn't lack for entertainment. With all the influence he has now, Cara scoffed. They'd name the Y village after him if he asked. I'm sure they wouldn't. Cara didn't even deign to look up from her meal. Odd, she'd had the strangest cravings lately. Right, Hoshi frowned. Speaking of asking. Slowly and painfully, her pale, benevolent gaze swiveled to him and Mikoto, brimming with an oh-so-subtle aura of menace in place of her normally staid confidence. It seems someone got a herd start when we weren't. Looking danger yander alert awe. Such was the price of caring for so many people. He'd learned a great many things about the beauties who surrounded him. Key amongst them, some did not take challenges to this strange little relationship kindly, even if that challenge was something as unexpected as having a son. I hope so. Kushina's smile remained fixed in place from where she lounged on the couch, quietly combing a twitchy Yorwich's hair. But the eerie aura of doom didn't abate, still leaking from her like a cracked sieve. Otherwise, we won't be held responsible for what happens. You're not helping. Naruto swore and resumed his furious pace back and forth in the den room, hands clenched behind his back, trying not to unleash Susanoo and level the entire village. Distantly, he felt the warm hearth of the fire against his back. A balm to the otherwise immutable chills racing up and down his spine. He wasn't ill, mind you, far from it. He'd never been more hale and healthy. The medics told him his wounds had healed at a ridiculous rate, no surprise there, and he would be back in fighting shape in no time at all. Try telling that to the terror gripping him, however, and it would have laughed. A cold, frigid rope of dread had tied itself into painful knots in his gut ever since he'd slain Fugaku last night. Know you no pain. Those words rang in his mind, even now. Because it wasn't over. It wasn't. It was only beginning. Madara was lashing out at him now, actively seeking to interfere in what he was doing. No sleep, no rest, he hadn't even eaten. Every waking moment had been spent making sure others were all ready, clearing away the debris with his powers, hoisting this beam, helping Nawaki begin the reconstruction, reassuring civilians and townsfolk. Like that, no, they weren't being invaded, no, Iwa hadn't struck at them, it was relentless. An endless series of shapes and blurs and sounds that had long since ceased to have any proper purpose. That wasn't even the crux of the matter. In a matter of hours his stellar reputation in the village had gone from legendary to outright worship, and that bothered him immensely. For the life of him, he couldn't figure out what to do about it. Oh, he may have saved the village, may have driven off and subsequently slain the one responsible, but he still felt the guilt for the destruction that had been caused most keenly. He had brought with him a horde of refugees and new shinobi that not only required food and shelter in a now damaged village, but needed to be integrated as well. Naruto, in short, chaos. The dawn had come now, and with it, a demand for answers. Naruto, Fugaku may not have been able to reveal his secret, but in the chaos before his return, the madman had leveled entire blocks of the village. The Yonbai had been devoured, much like the Sanbai, by that strange presence within him, but that did nothing to answer the questions. Where was it? Why had it struck? What were they going to do about it? Summoning a dragon atop only added more questions. Naruto, despite this recent influx of goodwill, every fiber of his being shrieked for him to take his loved ones and get the hell out of Dodge. But to do that was madness. He couldn't just uproot so many lives on a whim. Where would they even go? Soon, not a good idea for raising a newborn. Iwa wanted his head on a stick, so nope, that wasn't happening. Kumo was out of the question, and trekking all the way back to war-torn Kiri wasn't exactly wise, either. So, no, not a lot of options in that regard, which meant crap. Naruto, what? Spinning about, he fixed Mikoto with a glower. She returned it in spades, not moving from her chair. Is Kushina alive? It was not an inquiry, but a statement. Asu the redhead saluted merrily from across the room. And kicking. The rage in his eyes clouded. Yeah, are the others alive? She pressed, standing, crossing the room to him. Yes, and if you would just let me. Am I alive? She stepped to him. Yes. Is your son alive? His eyes flitted down to the mewling babe in her arms. Her child. His son. Theirs. Tenderly, he reached down to poke the tiny cheek of his son. Never get used to that, and smiled softly. Yorwichi thrust her head up at his elbow, eager to get another glimpse at her little brother. Giggling, she held out a finger, cooing softly as the infant's puny fist closed around it. Kushina and the others took that opportunity to crowd in as well, always delighted to see baby attach his face. Wow, we really are one big, crazy family. Seeing their smiling faces, Naruto felt the last brick in the wall of his resistance crumble. Yes, then relax, darling. Humming softly, the Uchiha heiress nuzzled her cheek against his own, kissing him softly. We won, she said, drawing away. There will be other battles, other foes to face. Other children, too. Color leached out of his face as though someone had dumped bleach on his head. Yorwichi laughed, delighted. Really? Lord Naruto. Before he could reply to that particular landmine, an Ambu thrust their head through a window, their bat-like mask startling everyone present. Hokage-sama requests your and Lady Mizuka's presence in his quarters at once. Right away, the Uchiha all but bolted, thankful to escape that catastrophe. So is nettled Conan inquired, glancing after his fading form. Super nettled Yahiko grinned. Yoriichi blinked. But Fugaku's dead. Why would he be? Yes, and the one behind him will just find another pawn. Kushina shook her head, watching his retreating back as Mei hastened after him. He can't abide by that. Naruto looked like he was about to bolt the moment the Anbu dragged him into the office. Oi, what's this about? Sarutobi didn't blame him, he'd called him here to deliver a mission report, but for Orochimaru to be here, well, it killed two birds with one stone. He had a mission to give him, and at the same time, he could gauge his reaction to the news he'd just given the Uchiha. His reaction would be crucial in determining his position down the road. So, he came right out and said it, awaiting his reaction. You want me to be Hokage? By contrast, Orochimaru looked stricken. When the war is over, of course, Hiruzen stifled a cough behind his hand. You've done much for this village and its people, the recent attack notwithstanding. Their trust in you runs deeper than ever. And I understand that congratulations are in order. How is little Itachi? The man sputtered, coloring. Well, sir, I trust his grandfather looks forward to seeing his new heir. Naruto colored. Right, talking with the clan heads. There was a discussion he was looking forward to. So there we are, unless you have another recommendation. Yeah, no, I refuse. The sudden and abrupt denial nearly gave Hiruzen a heart attack. What this is unexpected. Naruto glanced to the shinobi at his side. Looking back, the decision was obvious. The Orochimaru of his day would have been a terrible Hokage. But the one standing beside him was different. He'd stepped off the path of power and taken more than a few steps toward the light. The man standing beside him was one he'd gladly call friend. He'd share a drink with him any day. And with that, he knew what needed to be done. I nominate Orochimaru in my place. What? WHAT? The pale man practically exploded, such was his surprise. Naruto-kun, what are you? Zip it, let me talk. Naruto didn't need to look to feel those golden eyes burning into his back, assessing him as he stepped forward, laying hands on the old man's desk. Regardless, he made his case. Look, I really appreciate the honor, but let's face it, I don't deserve it. I haven't even been here a full 2 years yet, and I really suck at paperwork. I belong in the field, not behind a desk. I don't have the trust of the people anywhere else. But all Rachi here, he nudged the pale Sannin beside him, he has all the experience I lack. He's been a Konoha shinobi for years, the people know him. Trust him. More importantly, they're not terrified out of their wits by him. And Yaoi were certain of this. Sarutobi frowned. Yep, they would love him as he is now. Wah. I need you to go to Iwa. Alright, sounds doable. Just let me get a team too. Alone. Dark eyes narrowed. Wanna tell me why? You're going to assassinate that Tsuchikage. For the first time since they'd met, Naruto visibly recoiled in shock. I beg your pardon. I believe I should take my leave, Orochimaru said suddenly, speaking abruptly. I'll see you later, Naruto-kun. Mason. Alright, wait. Naruto felt a cold weight of lead drop into his gut as he was left alone with Mei and Sarutobi. You mean to tell me Iwa had a hand in this? We're not entirely certain, but the signs point to it. Fugcow obviously had help, and that the Yanbai was present also points to their involvement. Since its attack, we've caught several spies trying to leave the village. At best, they're simply gathering intel. At worst, an invasion is imminent. In our weakened state, our enemies could easily take advantage. Great, because that's all we need right now. But killing a cage biju or not, isn't that a little, I dunno, his hand gestured wildly, overboard. Speaking of the four tails, a thick pause fell over the room, thick and clawing as Hiruzen steered the subject back on track. You never mention it in your reports. How did you drive it off? Naruto looked away, almost as though he were ashamed. In the end, he decided not to pursue it. If the young man was capable of taking down biju on an almost daily basis, then who was he to question how it was done? I'd understand if you refused, given what happened. He provided, when the silence continued to pervade the room. But if you agree, it happens now. Mei nearly shouted him down at that, only narrowly restraining herself. Lord Hokage, you can't just. Naruto exhaled mightily. Grumbling, he spun and strode away, darting out the window. They balked, hurrying after him. Wait, where are you? Oh, the usual. Just going to kill an ancient, evil Uchiha. Wipe out a village. That sort of thing. I'll be home for dinner. Biting his thumb, he slapped his hand down on empty air. All the stops. Every last one. He was determined to do this before his better judgment got him in another bind, before Madara could strike again. With that in mind, he reached deep and summoned a force that made the world quiver. A deafening roar greeted his summons, his feet alighting on a great, broad back. Come, Alduin. Just like that, he went to war, and everything fell apart. Alive. Pain equals fire equals death. Regeneration. No sleeping. Pulled yanked awoken death. Dream words. Noise. Sound. Sleep. Everything's jumbled, like thick, angry knots. Can't think. No focus. I'm tired. Sleep. Need sleep. Floating. Voices. And then, pain. I can think now. A little. Tiny thoughts, small thoughts, not unlike those of a child. There's more of me now, for lack of a better term. Or is it I whatever I am? I don't know. Or if I do, don't remember. It's warm here, wherever here is safe. Like a cradle. I feel my eyes open, only to close again. Chakra flows through me, warmed by the distant exhalation of breath. It burns through me, and for a single moment of blessed clarity, I hear a voice. Gokamikkyu. Sleepy now. Rest. My mind is clearer now. Distant sensations come to me, muted, faint, but still there. I feel the sand against my skin. Hear voices. See things. Like a waking dream, one that I might stir from at any given moment. I have no voice, no form, nothing beyond my own thoughts. I have learned how to speak, yet I cannot find words. Strange. My soul is like a jigsaw puzzle, slowly being pieced together, one part at a time. I know not what or who I am, only that I exist, a parasite in this body. I draw strength from him, and he draws that strength from me, the feedback empowering us both. I owe him much. Somehow, my mind knows that I am bound to him. We are intrinsically tied together. He and I, without him I would die, and, had he not my strength, he too would perish once more. Perhaps, someday, I can tell him of this. Perhaps, someday, I can tell him thank you. But for now, my eyes see what he sees. And so I watch, and I learn. I watch him and I wonder, why does he fight? What compels him to go to such lengths as these, to prolong his own agony? If this is life, then life is a cruel, bitter thing. Better to dream than live in such a wretched world. In dreams one cannot be harmed. You cannot suffer. You cannot die. In a dream, reality is yours to shape as you see fit, but in the waking world, we are all slaves to reality. I sense that my host no, I will not call him that any longer. I sense that Naruto knows this as well as I. He has even conveyed as much to those who ask. And yet still he smiles. Still, he seeks to change the future. Why would not it be better to dream? Why fight? Why flail? Why struggle so? When the world itself stands against you, what does it take? And yet perseveres. I see him take comfort in those he cares for. Perhaps it is they who give him the strength to continue. Perhaps it is I who am wrong. I remember my name now, but I am afraid to speak it. Names have power, and I fear that if I dare speak mine aloud, I will remember. I do not want to remember. In truth, I want these idyllic days to continue forever. I, who once deemed this man a savage fool, have come to see the error of my ways. Strange as it might sound, I can see the merit in his actions. He fights not just for himself, but for those he loves. Past, present, and future. In a single being, no less. My thoughts turn now to myself, wondering how I came to be trapped inside him. What am I? My memory still eludes me. I want to talk to him. I want to understand. I need to understand him. He is of light and dark, a lover and warrior both, gentle to those he cares for, and a terror to those who would harm them. He cares not for the curses he receives, nor the blame when he makes a mistake. He simply does what must be done, and strives ever onward. Not an evil man, but a necessary one. He is the hero that this world deserves, just not the one that it needs right now. Many will curse him, damn him for what he does, but still, he presses on. Still, if not him. What does this world need, then? Family. Is this what it means? I did not think it possible for one man to love so many women and yet, at the same time, care for them in equal measure. There are no favorites, no singling out of those who are weaker, stronger, or the like. He devotes himself to each of them in equal measure, and they love him for it. Just as he cares for those 3 children in his own way, he holds nothing back beyond his secret. This, I can understand. Were word to get out, the results would be disastrous. I cannot help him, but my powers have grown enough to give subtle nudges where necessary. A push here, a forgotten fact there, a slip of a tongue suppressed. These are the only things I can do for him for now. I have dared to speak to him at last, but he is hostile towards me, demanding answers. Answers I do not feel I can yet give. It is my hope that, in time, this attitude will change. Strength. I feel reborn, empowered. Mating with the Uzumaki girl did something to me. I feel different. Not better, but not worse, either. Strange. Yes, I suppose that would be the word. I had long since devoured the last of Naruto's Biju chakra, but this, like comparing a puddle to a lake, what a difference. Even now I feel myself thrumming with energy, buzzing with chakra, and possessing no outlet for it. My might is returning. But I worry. What will I become once if I remember who I'm supposed to be? Every day I grow stronger. The return journey from Kiri takes weeks, and in these weeks I feel my strength begin to return in spades. Absorbing the sanbai was an act of instinct on my part. I cannot truly say what compelled me to do so, only that I did. Like a child taking their first, tottering steps, I instinctively knew how to make the 3-tailed turtle a part of me, and that frightens me. Badly. Naruto's chakra is becoming separate from mine, to the point where I seldom feel its warmth any longer. We are no longer so tightly bound as we once were, and that upsets me. Does it have something to do with absorbing the sanbai, or was our separation a slower, more gradual process one I failed to notice? What else have I missed? My psyche, once in pieces, is returning. Will it be for good or ill? He nearly lost the Uzumaki girl today. I helped him, I saved her. I, who absorbed the yanbai during the chaos of that fool Fugaku's assault, used most of its power to bring the girl back from the brink. I did so without thought, and it was then, as I nearly pushed myself into oblivion, that I realized what I had done. I am not whole, but now I am even less than what I once was. All for the point of seeing him smile, of sparing him tears. Why? Why did I do that? Why do I care for him? He is my cradle, my nursery. His body has nurtured me albeit uncowingly as I recovered. What is he to me? I know I have no claim to him, nay, he does not even know me beyond a disembodied voice in the back of his brain. He owes me no loyalty. Indeed, I don't think he would even understand if I admitted I had designs on him. It would be like a ghost trying to interact with the living, a fractured soul trying to find a place in a world that rejected it with no guarantee of finding happiness. Did I truly do that? Would you? I am a piece, a shadow, a ghost, a whisper of something that was once mighty. I am utter hubris. What am I? I was, is, am no one. Whatever I once was, I no longer am. I think I understand now. I am a piece of something, a shard broken off from the greater whole. Now this shard has its own consciousness, broken as it is. I know my name. I know what I like and what I do not. And I know that, unequivocally, have fallen head over heels for this buffoon. Am I content with this merely watching, never interacting, a silent pawn on the chessboard of life? Am I truly content to live out eternity like this? I wish it were so. Bones, are these the things that drive him? His morals are my morals. His goals, my goals. The motives that drive him, now my own. Any pretense of impartiality on my part can no longer be maintained. I know who I am, but not what. I suppose I never will. After all, even a broken piece of glass can still show one's reflection. I suppose that is my fate. For so long I have stayed my hand out of fear or breaking this delicate balance sustained by he and I, by the world. But I will not lay here, unnoticed, while he risks his life. No, for too long, my eyes have watched as he sacrificed and sweat and swore, but no more. My name is Kaguya Utsuki, and I will be silent no longer. The scariest man out there is not the psychopath who feels nothing, it's the man who knows the meaning of pain, for he is driven to cause hurt. Truer words have never been spoken. Now I want you to think about that for a moment before you condemn me. Men, what, pray tell, would you do if someone tried to take your love and butcher them? And women, if someone tried to take your beloved from you by some cruel, ill-begotten means, would you stand there and let them pry the light out of your eyes? Take the person, that part of your soul to whom you've devoted your light, your love, life and happiness? Of course not. You'd march right up there and kill that or barring that, why them so badly they'd never think to do it again. That is the reason for my deeds today. I will be known as a monster after this, a manslayer, the Black Death in its purest form. Violent, chaotic, cold, unfeeling. It does not pause to give mercy, it does not stay a hand out of pity. It simply strikes and strikes and strikes again until there is nothing left to kill. I write these words now as my memoir, in case this should go south, so that I will be known. My methods, my motives, my deeds. I am Uchiha Naruto, and I am a fraud. I don't expect to be understood, only known. And to my enemies, I say thus, suffer me now. Well, that ought to do it. Humming softly, the Black Death closed his journal and sealed it away in his pack. Naruto was silent for a long moment, staring down at the quill in his hands. Then he sealed that, too. Knowing that this might very well be his last entry was a sobering thought, one he had no desire to dwell on. But alas, his mind was not something so easily tamed. It raged in countless directions even as he sought to rein them in. A bucking stallion, as wild and fierce as ever, refusing to obey. Are you satisfied? And then there was the matter of his partner, Mount. Even at this altitude, he found he could hear Alduin, the lord of all dragons, most clearly. The most dreaded of all summons, the price for calling whom could only be paid in death. Perhaps he'd summoned him in a show of resolve, for once released, the word eater would not so easily return from whence he'd come. I've made peace as best I can, the Onsiformer blonde muttered. Remember our deal, whelp. I know, he sighed morosely. The village is yours. Do with it as you will. Well said. Riding atop the back of an almighty world eater was a feat few could lay claim to. Less a man writing in his diary amidst the writhing winds. He knew he was breaking his edict, but it couldn't be helped. Alduin would not be satisfied with the death of one man. Nor, in truth, would he. If he killed Onoki and left, Iwa would seek vengeance. There was, of course, a remedy for that. A foul, bitter pill, one that he was loath to swallow, but do so he must, even if it meant going against orders. Tonight, the earth burned. He could see the sun just beginning to set as they swooped down upon the outskirts of the village. Jagged rays of red and orange painted the sky red, heralding the coming of night. Naruto felt something twist inside of him as he gazed upon the scene, committing it to memory. By this time tomorrow, there would be only ash and dust. What have I become, that I would do this, he muttered. Where have I gone wrong? Steel your heart. Once more, that ghostly voicey a woman's voice trailed in his ear. The end comes. The final act is nearly at hand. What you do here today will shape the fate of nations. With that, Naruto felt the last string of his patience finally snap. In the last week alone he had been pushed almost non-stop, constantly being sent on missions, tasks, never once having a chance for peace and quiet. Now, he was in no mood for games. With a roar, he reached in, deep inside himself, found the presence, and plucked it out, forcing it to the surface, even as it struggled to wriggle away. Enough games. What are you? Very well. In a swirl of blue-white light, she was there. Naruto stared at her for a long moment, this pale, horned woman, ghostly, almost ethereal, and frowned. She looked little more than a ghost to his eyes, a wraith, her pale white orbs burning on him. A long, deceptively weak-looking hand pushed through white hair as she gazed upon him, smiling. I am a whisper. I am shadow. I am a ghost. What men fear most. You nurtured me, raised me, helped me to grow inside of you until I became aware. Her white eyes cast him a long, loving look. I owe you much. I say again. What are you? He ground his teeth. A piece of something. She hummed, the sound like a faint symphony, just a small one. Her delicate fingers pinched together in emphasis. For days I dwelt within you. You were my savior, my protector, my guardian. I have been with you this whole time. Every act of kindness, savagery, brutality, and mercy. I saw it all. Ah, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Aren't I to answer your first inquiry? My name is. Naruto leaned forward in anticipation. Kaguya. Is that name supposed to mean something? I suppose not. She demurred with a sigh. Even I don't truly know what it means. I believe it is important, however. Ah, but we are here. He stared into the brush below, frowning. There's nothing down the. Look again. You will see the scouts. Oi, no. The woman smiled. Just like that, he could see. Like the Byakugan, only 10 times more effective, the world was suddenly laid out before him. Naruto saw it all. Every enemy troop positioned well, even where they kept their armaments. This was vision that defied even the Sharingan, allowed him to see everything as if he were a god, not a man. The scouts were entirely vulnerable as the watch stalked them in the dark, and they didn't even know it. Wordlessly, he dropped from the back of Alduin, alighting nearest the southernmost man. See through my eyes, the white wraith murmured. Know your enemy. Then, in an impossible move, she strode forward and whispered to the sentry, words in his ear. He's behind you, she said. The poor sod started. Who? Me. That was his last thought before a hand closed around the scout's face. Forfeit your mind. Night duty, they called it. Every soldier had to take his turn whether they liked it or not, standing in the storm with a sputtering torch. Someone had to watch, had to stare into those shifting, deceitful mists and wonder if anyone was out there. It was a cruel, thankless task, but someone had to do it. Watching, fearing whatever might be lurking just beyond their vision, waiting to strike. Shin knew there was. He knew it, but never spoke. Anoki laughed at such superstitions. Of course he did. He was the Tsuchikage. He was used to it, with his years of experience. He knew better than to fear it, supposedly. Oi, his partner, Ikki said, stepping up to the edge of the wall. Do you see anything out there? She scoffed loudly, annoyed. Of course he didn't. They stood with several dozen others on the perimeter of the village wall, watching from the outer keep wall a low fortification, perhaps 20 feet tall, that surrounded the grounds. Their job was to look for anything suspicious in the night, which, when you thought about it, staring at an endless sea of black, was incredibly boring. Who would be fool enough to attack you now? Anyway, after what had happened to Konoha, no one had dared challenge him hence. When you gave the strongest village a black eye, everyone tended to back off. Oh, everyone expected a reprisal sure enough, but that was Shi's job. They were the first line of the defense, ready to sound the alarm at the slightest sign of danger. Still suspicious. That was the word that they used. It was all suspicious. It was night. That shifting mist against the black, that void made of darkness and stone. He had never trusted it. He was out there, he knew. The thing that was in the employ of Konoha. The Black Death. The man who had forced Suna and Kiri to ally with them. The man whose village they'd attacked, solely on the word of that masked man. Really, it was only a matter of time before it came here, to the land of Earth. The thought made Shi whimper. No, he was getting ahead of himself, sending one man to assault a village, even someone like the Black Death. That was suicide. No sir, not happening. Something moved in the darkness. She stepped back, staring into the void, his heart beginning to flutter, hands beginning to sweat as he raised his blade. Wait, what was that noise? A distant flap of a sound, like wings beating on the far horizon. Like an eagle or a bird. But that was impossible. For them to hear it at this range, it must have been a massive beast, gargantuano. He ran a hand through his flat, black hair, bright, dark eyes growing wet with a sudden fear. Tears. Oh no, no. There's something. Yeah, Ikki said, squinting. I swear I see. Burned. He came, as she had always known he would, on a bestial, demonic roar of a howl. On the back of a winged dragon. Like 1,000 gnats on a hot day, like a hail of burning blue arrows shot by an entire army. A shower of burning flame and death sprayed across the battlements, charring stone and bone. A wall of shimmering death, hundreds of fiery trails zipping through the night. Metal rang against stone and his fellows cried out in pain. Everywhere, wherever he looked, he saw it. Red, an endless stain of red. And then he saw it. It swooped over the battlements like a cloud, blown on the wind. A dragon, larger than any beast or summons he'd ever seen. Whatever it was, it drove people mad, sending them shrieking and gibbering like lunatics, scratching wildly at their faces as they burned aflame, clawing out their eyes, yipping madly, inane beasts. Intruder, Ikki bellowed out, someone get hand, we need the 5 tails we need. She stepped back again away from the clouds of shadow and flame, retreating as Ikki yelled out in alarm. He died halfway through the call, a kunai snapping wetly through his mouth, throwing out a chip of tooth as it proceeded out the back of his head. He collapsed and she stumbled away from the corpse, knowing that it was too late to run. He was going to die here, he realized. He was going to die here at the hands of the Black Death, and it was going to hurt, and no, he wasn't ready. And, yelping, he ducked down, holding his head between his hands, daring to peek through them. Abruptly, the rain of kunai stopped. Silence in the air. Soldiers lay dying or groaning at his feet. Then it came. Whoosh! With a dull thud, Alduin crashed down onto the battlements, nearly flattening him. As it were, the sheer force of its landing drove Shi onto his back. A clawed hand crushed down to his right, preventing him from leaping off the wall and into the village. Then it happened. Black Death, a dark shadow of death in the night, a demon in the mist. He leapt neatly off the dragon's back with a rustle of cloth, landing neatly before him in a gymnast's crouch. A harsh thud resounded in his ears and he looked you at it and immediately wished he hadn't. Because he, the damned Uchiha, was here. He straightened slowly, and he found himself staring at a face set in stone, a rictus of a scowl leering furiously down at his behind a half-mask, covering his jaw, eerie, blank eyes peering down at him. He leered down at him, raising a hand, considering. And then he spoke, tugged down the mask, his words like rolling boulders. "Stand," he said. She squeaked and thrust at him with a knife, desperately. An angry hiss issued forth from his enemy at the weak effort. "I said stand. Die on your feet." He died. Terrified and crying, he scrambled backwards on his hands, a drunken crab struggling to get away from this thing, but the Black Death reached down and grabbed him, forcing him to look into those blazing, coal-red eyes. A low growl snaked through the air between them as he was hoisted up, forced to look into those deathly eyes. "Anoki, where is he?" "I don't know," he cried. "No one does. He hasn't been seen for weeks." She squeaked softly, ducking down as the Black Death's beast leaned forward, noxious fumes of napalm spraying his face. Two final words issued forth from that hideous maw. "Too bad." Just like that, he spread his arms and left him behind, alone amid the corpses of what had once been a squad of nearly 100 men. His knees gave and he collapsed into a boneless heap, sobbing. Oh, thank heaven he was safe. He never noticed the kunai in his gut until he'd bled out. Finally, blessedly, the terror left him. "Thank you." Naruto paused, glancing at his victims as he sailed over the village. Interestingly enough, these men and women almost seemed to be expecting him. Fascinating. Was Anoki ready for him? Had someone tipped him off, or was he simply unwilling to lower his guard in a time of war such as this? Whether it stemmed out of negligence or incompetence, it mattered little to him. He needed to find a way to the cage without being detected, or things were sure to go amiss in any case. Leveling the village, as bitter a task as that was, came later. Like that guard he'd killed. Why had he done that? The man had been terrified, yet he'd died, like the rest. Some pills must be swallowed, no matter how bitter. Kaguya quoted, frowning, and I tracked toward a nearby window. To conquer fear you must become fear. You must bask in the fear of other men. And men fear most what they cannot see. You have to become a terrible thought. Kaguya's voice rang in his mind, the words from before echoing in his skull like a clarion call. Like your surname, your title. You have to become an idea. Feel terror cloud their senses. Feel its power to distort, to control, and know that this power can be yours. Embrace your worst fear. Become one with the darkness. Focus, concentrate, master your senses. You cannot leave any sign. Then he got an idea. An awful idea. The Uchiha got a wonderful, awful idea. What are you suggesting? Surrender. You wish to draw the cage out, give up. After all this, he will almost certainly come to you. And so he did. Oi, with a loud shout, the Uchiha raised his hands, laughing as Alduin swooped past, raining hell on a nearby homestead. I surrender. When he woke, it was almost a surprise. He was sitting up, tied and bound, feeling as if someone had picked him up and slammed him against the wall a few times. Like he'd been shoved through a storm of blades. He groaned, sitting up in the darkness. In the dim light everything seemed almost unnaturally dark, and he ached, oh how he ached, his head pounding. Okay, guess it worked. He sat up further. It made his body feel even worse, but satisfaction dulled the pain to a slight edge as he sat there, blinking. The terrible agonies he'd suffered during his sleep instantly became apparent, gradually being replaced by the cool sensation of the cooled cobblestones beneath her legs. Aches and old pains resolved themselves and, blessedly, his mind came back to him. He flexed his arms, flinching slightly. Well, mission accomplished. Now, let's see if it paid off. And he's awake. He was not disappointed. Naruto looked up, and sure enough, there, behind barrier seal reinforced glass, Anoki was leering at him. Really, that was almost too easy. So here he is, the Great Black Death. He looked younger, Naruto realized, but that was to be expected. Did you really think you could kill me? Yes. Anoki looked down at him and spat. Why are you here, brat? Because of that attack. It was just a young family. Silence reigned. Enough dispose of him. Scoffing, the old cage turned to storm away. Naruto exhaled softly. Anoki, slowly, angrily, like the breath of a great dragon, preparing to exhale. The entire room fell silent. Just a family, it was a whisper, slithering through the silence. In my darkest hour, they gave me hope. They reminded me that life is more than just necessary. Precious, something to respected, preserved, defended at all costs. And on something as stupid as a Wimyu. When he looked up, those eyes weren't red. They were white. No eyes, no irises. Just the blank slits of an angry god, pure and enraged. Bottomless. The pits to hell. He tried to take that from me. A pair of red dots blossomed on his forehead, fingers sharpening into claws. Steal that from me. His voice deepened, as though another were speaking with him. No, through him. Kill that from me. Despite his best efforts, that Tsuchikage, Anoki, actually flinched back. Those eyes, what were those eyes? People have been asking me what I'm going to do to those responsible. Naruto snarled, his soaked hair bleaching itself white as the helpless cage looked on, and until now, I really haven't had an answer for that. What am I? His head at his side, fangs flashing murderously as the last of his ebon locks stained themselves an eerie, ashen gray, the color of dead snow. A savior killer murderer of men, his bound arms strained against the shackles and chains holding him, digging viciously into the barbed wire. Horns sprouted in his head, twin points of scarlet relief standing up amidst the white. However, in a single movement he scythed his legs out from under him, shattering the chair into splinters. I've realized something. It doesn't matter who I am, what I am. A trapped hand pressing against the floor, twisting upright against the blades, uncaring for the barbs that bit into his flesh. I'm here, and you're in my way. Half of his wrist was all it took to sever the bindings entirely. The moment his hands were free, bodies began hitting the floor in gore-y succession. His face shoved up against the glass of the interrogation room and splintered it, eyes ablaze. The angry, newborn, horned god stalked towards Anoki, eyes aglow, twin coals in his skull. When he spoke, his voice was like rolling boulders scraping together. So you can tell me where the Madara is, or you can die screaming alongside him. Rationality deserted Anoki. Him monster, Noyan the devil. I have heard. That was all he could think, even as a glowing blue hand burst through the barrier and closed around his face, burning him, his flesh, his mind, his very soul, stripping it bare. Naruto's eyes, no, not his eyes, the eyes of a being overshadowing him, acting through him, bored into his soul, searing him like the brand on that hand. 3 words ripped through him, flaying him apart as it sought for his knowledge. Suffer me now. And then he was gone. Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.